This is Daily Story, where the scariest and most haunting tales are told every day. The strange noises in the night, the silent figures in the dark, the memories no one dares to recall, all come alive here. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell, if you're brave enough. And don't forget to leave a comment, because who knows, your story might be the next haunting tale we tell. Now let's begin.
The first date I had with her was strange. We met at a little bistro in the perpetually damp city of Etheria, a place where the streetlights always seemed to struggle against a clinging, oppressive fog. She was pretty in a fragile, distant sort of way, but there was an unnerving disconnect in her eyes, as if she were observing reality from behind a thick pane of glass. Her name was Lilith, and her voice was so soft it was almost swallowed by the clinking of cutlery and the low murmur of other diners. Our conversation was a series of stops and starts, an awkward, disjointed affair where I felt like I was doing all the work, barely able to hear her whisper replies. When the night finally drew to a close, she simply stood up and walked away without a word. I was left sitting there, a mix of confusion and relief washing over me. But then, just as she reached the door, she stopped, turned, and walked back to the table with a slow, deliberate pace, as if a forgotten line of code had just been executed. She offered a slight, almost rehearsed smile and said, "We should do this again." It felt less like a suggestion and more like an afterthought, a poorly imitated gesture of human courtesy she had seen somewhere before. Against every screaming instinct in my gut, I heard myself agree. Our second date was a movie, a surreal sci-fi piece about a team of scientists exploring some kind of alien anomaly that warped the very fabric of their reality. The theater was old and smelled of dust and decay, the velvet seats worn smooth by countless patrons. As the film's bizarre, vibrant visuals filled the screen, Lilith began to unravel. She flinched at the shifting colors, her hands flying to her face to shield her eyes, letting out small, sharp gasps of distress. It was not a particularly frightening movie, more unsettling than anything, but she reacted as if she was being physically assaulted by the images on screen. Afterward, we found ourselves in the dim, sticky quiet of the theater's adjoining bar. She was still visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she clutched a glass of water, trying to process what she had just seen. As we talked, she tried to show me a hotel reservation she had made for an upcoming weekend trip. I glanced at her phone, and a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. The name on the booking wasn't Lilith. It was Eleonora. When I asked, she offered no explanation, just a vague, dismissive wave of her hand, as if I was foolish for even noticing. The thought echoed in my mind. Louder this time, I should have ended it right there. But I did not. A week later, we made plans for a third date. I was to pick her up from her apartment and we'd go for Thai food. The address she gave me led me to a part of Etheria I'd never seen before, a labyrinth of narrow, forgotten alleyways known as the Blackwood Narrows. There were no roads here, just slick, moss-covered cobblestones that seemed to swallow the sound of my footsteps. The buildings leaned in on either side, their grimy windows like vacant eyes in the gloom. It felt less like a residential street, and more like a forgotten scar on the city's map. I parked several blocks away and made my way through the oppressive quiet, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, and something else, something vaguely metallic. As I stood before a rusted, wrought-iron gate, my phone buzzed with a text from her, just finishing my coffee. "Come on in." I pushed the gate open, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped into a small, desolate courtyard. The apartment directly in front of me was completely gutted, its windows covered in thick plastic sheeting. It looked disturbingly like a staging ground for something terrible. My unease was now a palpable, physical thing, a cold weight in my chest. Her apartment was off to the side, its door partially obscured by overgrown ivy. As I raised my hand to knock, the door swung open. A massive, 130-pound dog, a breed I could not immediately place, padded silently over to me. It didn't bark or growl, it just watched me with an unnerving intelligence in its dark eyes. Lilith stood in the doorway, a half-empty coffee mug in her hand. She looked at the dog, snapped her fingers onto a sharp, crisp sound in the silence and stared at it. The animal immediately ceased its inspection of me and returned to her side, its obedience absolute and instantaneous. "Good boy," she murmured, her voice flat. Dog owners often use commands to assert dominance, but this was different. There was a level of control in that simple gesture that was deeply unsettling, more like a puppeteer pulling a string than an owner commanding a pet. She invited me inside, and I noted with a growing sense of dread that she was not finishing her coffee, she had just poured it. Her apartment was nicely furnished, a stark contrast to the decay outside. The kitchen was immaculate, with a full set of gleaming knives mounted on a magnetic strip on the wall. She was a psychiatrist, she explained, who saw patients from a home office. Pill bottles were scattered across a side table like fallen soldiers. We sat in an awkward silence as she slowly sipped her coffee, the minutes stretching into an eternity. After what felt like half an hour, her roommate emerged from a downstairs bedroom. He was a large man with a vacant, unsettling stare, and he shared my name, Jacob. He nodded at me once before disappearing into the kitchen. He returned a moment later carrying a black, rolled-up bundle of canvas. There are only two types of people who carry rolls like that: chefs and assassins. I knew in that instant, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, what it was. A set of knives. I glanced toward the kitchen, my mind racing. There was already a perfectly good set of knives on the wall. Why would he need another? The roommate, Jacob, paid me no mind. He unrolled the bundle on the coffee table, revealing a collection of wicked-looking blades. He selected one and began to sharpen it on a long metal rod, the rhythmic shing-shing-shing of steel on steel filling the suffocating silence. All the while, he stared directly at me, his eyes empty and cold. A real chef. I thought, my heart hammering against my ribs, would use a whetstone. I looked over at Lilith, searching for any sign of alarm, but her expression was one of absolute calm, as if a man sharpening a set of professional-grade killing tools in her living room was the most normal thing in the world. He moved to the kitchen and began to chop an onion, his technique clumsy and inefficient. He had no idea what he was doing. This was not about cooking. This was a performance, a threat. My hand was on the doorknob, my body screaming at me to flee, when Lilith stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself another cup of coffee. She sat back down, fixing me with that same disconnected gaze. "Are you sure you do not want a cup?" she asked, her voice a near whisper. I looked at the array of pill bottles on the table, and then back at her and her serial killer in training roommate. I did not know what they were planning, but I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted no part of it. For another 20 minutes, I was paralyzed by fear, my mind a chaotic storm of horrifying possibilities. Finally, under the pretense of our Thai dinner, we left. The restaurant was a loud, vibrant place, a chaotic explosion of life that felt a million miles away from the dead silence of her apartment. 3 seats down from me, I saw a girl I'd dated a few months prior, someone I'd really liked who had abruptly ghosted me. She had blue hair now and looked utterly bored with her own date. It was a surreal, jarring coincidence in an already nightmarish evening. Over dinner, Lila began to open up, and the pieces of her strange, fractured life started to fall into place. She told me about her recent, messy divorce and how she was new to the city. Her roommate, Jacob, was a recovering meth addict she had taken in, letting him stay with her while he tried to piece his life back together. She explained that she had synesthesia and severe AD, which caused her to be overwhelmed by the chaotic visuals of the movie. Suddenly, the weirdness began to seem less sinister and more tragic. But even as she spoke, making a strange kind of sense of the evening's events, I could not shake the chilling memory of that knife, despite the absolute terror I would felt. I saw her, again. I don't know why. Maybe it was the story, or maybe some morbid curiosity had taken root in me, a desire to see how deep this rabbit hole went. We planned to see another movie, one at a theater with a strict no-entry policy. We met at the bar beforehand, and as the time ticked closer to the movie's start, she made no move to leave. She nursed her drink, taking slow, deliberate sips as I grew more and more agitated. "We're gonna miss it," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. She just smiled. We were 5 minutes late. Of course, forced to wait for the next showing. We sat in the bar, the space between us now filled with a palpable tension. The fragile connection we had started to build had been severed. We were two strangers who had seen too much of each other's strangeness, and the illusion of normalcy was gone. After the movie, we grabbed a bite to eat, and it was there that she finally showed her hand. "So," she began, her voice taking on a clinical, detached tone. "I do this for a living." My blood ran cold. I knew what was coming. She was going to analyze me, and she did, with a terrifying precision. She began to ask a series of deeply personal questions, peeling back the layers of my personality with the skill of a surgeon. In the span of a few minutes, she had reached the very core of me, identifying insecurities and fears I barely acknowledged to myself. She laid them bare on the table between us, her words hitting with a brutal, devastating accuracy. I was completely and utterly shattered, an emotional wreck, while she remained as calm and composed as ever, watching me with detached, professional curiosity. Back at her place, the emotional onslaught continued. She was deliberately trying to get a reaction out of me, to break through the carefully constructed walls ID built around myself. And it was working. I was a mess, vulnerable and exposed under her relentless psychological assault. I looked at her dog, lying silently at her feet, under her complete and total control, and I saw myself. I was just like that dog, broken, terrified, and completely under her spell. It was then that I glanced at an armchair behind me. Laid out perfectly on the cushions, gleaming in the dim light of the living room, were two large kitchen knives. That's when I finally understood. The empty apartment next door wasn't for rent. It was a kill room, a staging ground, and I was supposed to be the main event. I got the hell out of there, my heart pounding in my ears as I stumbled to the oppressive darkness of the Blackwood Narrows, the sound of my own frantic footsteps echoing in the suffocating silence. I did not look back. The moment he casually mentioned the sexual harassment investigation against him, my stomach dropped. I sat frozen in the passenger seat of his car, the cheap fabric sticking to my skin in the humid night air. My gaze was fixed on the blurred streetlights streaking past a window, but I was not really seeing them. My hand was clamped around the door handle, my knuckles bone white. His words, so nonchalant and unbothered, hung between us, thick and suffocating. My mind struggled to catch up. How had I gone from the cautious excitement of a first date to the surreal, horrifying drive to a fast food joint with a man who was practically a sentient red flag? Let me explain how I found myself trapped in this nightmare. We had matched on a dating app, and in the beginning, everything felt normal. His name was Marcus. He was charming in that easy, practice way. His messages filled with just the right mix of flattery and humor. After a few days of effortless back and forth, he suggested we meet. Dinner at his place. Had offered. A flicker of hesitation went through me going to a stranger's house on a first date felt like a rookie mistake. But I convinced myself I could handle it. I was careful. I told my friends my exact location, shared my live GPS data, and set up a check-in time. ID taking all the right precautions. So, I arrived at his house in the quiet, suburban neighborhood of Whisperwood, expecting, well, dinner. The invitation had been specific. ID naturally assumed there was a plan, maybe head cook, maybe would order in, or at the very least, maybe there would be snacks. But there was nothing. His house was nice enough, almost unnervingly clean, but it lacked any sense of warmth or life. No food sat on the counters. No drinks were offered, not even a glass of water. It felt like a sterile show home, devoid of personality. He offered me a seat on his stiff, uncomfortable couch, and we fell into a stilted conversation. After what felt like an eternity, My stomach began to growl, a low, embarrassing rumble in oppressive silence. So, I finally asked, trying to sound breezy, "Are we doing dinner or something?" He blinked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, as if ID just asked the most absurd question had ever heard. "Oh," he said, waving a hand dismissively. I already ate. I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for some kind of explanation that would make sense of the situation. That's when he dropped the bomb. "I had dinner with my ex," he added, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "She lives next door." My brain short-circuited. I was still trying to process you ate dinner with your ex when she's your neighbor hit me like a second wave. He seemed utterly unconcerned by how this might look, acting as if I were the strange one for being taken aback. Sensing my discomfort, though probably not understanding its depth, he offered a solution. "But I can take you to Taco Bell if you are hungry." Now, I have nothing against Taco Bell, but as a backup plan for a dinner date Head invited me on, after Head already eaten with his ex-girlfriend. The whole situation was descending into absurdity. Still, I went along with it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he could still turn the night around. He did not. The drive to Taco Bell was when the evening veered sharply from just weird into genuinely terrifying. As we pulled out his driveway, the car's headlights cutting a swath through the inky blackness of the suburban night, he started talking about his job. It was standard small talk at first, but then, without any change in his tone, he said it. "So, yeah, I have been dealing with this sexual harassment investigation at work." I went completely still. "What?" My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He did not stop there. He launched into the details with a disturbing lack of self-awareness, talking about the accusations and the misunderstandings, insisting it was not even that serious. At one point, he actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound, as if the whole thing were just some amusing anecdote. Meanwhile, I was having an out-of-body experience, a silent scream building in my chest. Every instinct I had was shrieking at me to get out, to run. I tried to keep my expression neutral, nodding just enough to avoid setting him off, my mind racing, desperately trying to formulate an escape plan. When we finally pulled into the garish, fluorescent glare of the Taco Bell parking lot, I mumbled something about not being that hungry after all. He insisted on ordering anyway, and I stood there awkwardly by the soda machine, unable to make eye contact, feeling the weight of his presence like a physical pressure. He kept talking, thankfully moving on from the investigation, but it did not matter. The damage was done. I just needed to get away from him. The second we got back to his house, I fabricated an excuse about an early morning. He seemed confused, maybe even a little offended that I wasn't staying, but he did not argue. The moment I was back in my own car and pulling out his driveway, the biggest sigh of relief I have ever experienced escaped my lips. I blocked his number before I even got to the end of his street. You would think that would be the end of it, but of course it was not. Over the next few weeks, he found other ways to contact me, messaging me through social media, asking why I ghosted him. He seemed genuinely baffled, as if he truly could not comprehend what he had done wrong. Was it something I said one message read? I wanted to scream. Yes, it was everything you said. "I can leave him for you," she said, her voice a low, desperate whisper as she leaned across the table, the candlelight flickering in her wide, earnest eyes. My stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. The air in the restaurant, which moments before felt warm and intimate, suddenly became heavy, suffocating. I felt trapped, caught in the undertow of a conversation I never wanted to have. The scraping of my chair against the polished floor was loud and jarring in the sudden silence as I pushed myself away from the table. "This is wrong," I managed, my voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "What you are doing is wrong." Her expression softened, her lips parting as if to offer another justification, another plea, but I could not bear to hear it. My head was spinning, a wave of nausea washing over me. I stood up, threw a handful of cash onto the table without counting it, and walked out into the cool night air. I did not look back. I could not. Let me tell you how I found myself on the 5th date with a woman who methodically dismantled the person I thought she was, piece by piece, until nothing was left but a stranger. It had all started so promisingly, like something out of romantic comedy. ID matched with Isabella a few months ago, and she was everything you look for: gorgeous, intelligent, with a life that seemed perfectly put together. Our first few dates were effortless. We just clicked. She possessed a magnetic quality, a natural charisma that drew people to her, and I was no exception. Our first date was coffee that bled into a 3-hour conversation. The second was dinner, followed by a long, meandering walk along the waterfront under a sky bruised with twilight. By the third, I was starting to think this could actually be something real. She was charming, sweet, and seemed completely captivated by me. But as it turns out, the most convincing deceptions are built on a foundation of half-truths. The red flags were there. I see that now, but they were so subtle, so easily explained away, that I didn't recognize them for what they were. She was always vague about her personal life, never offering more than surface-level details about her past relationships or her living situation. I did not push it. I figured she had her reasons, that she'd open up when she was ready. I wanted to give her the space to do that. By our 5th date, I was feeling confident, ready to let my guard down completely. She suggested a beautiful upscale restaurant, a place she claimed was her favorite, and I was genuinely looking forward to it. But the moment I sat down across from her, a strange feeling of unease settled over me. She was nervous, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a fidgety, anxious energy. Her eyes darted around the room, never quite settling on me. It was a stark contrast to the self-assured woman I'd come to know. When I asked if everything was all right, she forced a laugh and blamed it on a stressful day. I let it go. Halfway through dinner, she finally dropped the first bombshell. "So, I feel like I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I put my fork down, my body tensing in anticipation. "I have 2 kids. I blinked, processing the information. It was surprising, yes, but not a deal breaker. Not for me. "Okay," I said slowly. "Thanks for telling me. Why did not you mention before?" She offered a sheepish, almost childlike smile. "I was not sure how you would react." Fair enough. I told her I appreciated her honesty, that it didn't change anything. I was still interested. But then she hesitated, biting her lip. "Actually," she said, "there is something else." My chest tightened. "Okay," I prompted, bracing myself. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "I am still married." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. For a moment, I was sure I had misheard. "What?" I asked, my voice louder than I'd intended. "I am still married," she repeated, her tone chillingly casual, as if she were admitting to a minor traffic violation, not the fact that she was actively deceiving me while being legally bound to another person. I was floored. "Are you serious?" She finally met my eyes and nodded. "We are not together anymore," she insisted. "It is complicated." "Complicated," I echoed, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You are married. That is not complicated. That is wrong." I could not hide the disgust in my voice. My mind was racing, frantically replaying every conversation we'd ever had, every vague answer, every topic she had skillfully avoided. It all clicked into place, a sickening mosaic of lies. And that is when she said it, the 6 words that felt like a physical blow. "I can leave him for you." She delivered the line with such sincerity, as if it were a grand, romantic gesture, the logical solution to the mess she created. But all I could hear was a chilling prophecy: if you will do this to him, what is to stop you from doing it to me? You do not see how wrong this is, do you? I asked, my voice trembling. She leaned forward, reaching for my hand, but I pulled it away. "It is not like that," she insisted. "We are done." I just have not finalized everything yet. I could not listen to another word. A wave of revulsion washed over me, so strong I felt physically ill. You should figure out your own life before you drag someone else into it, I said, my voice cold and steady. Then I stood, threw the cash on the table, and walked out. Even as I left, I could feel her eyes on me, but I did not turn around. I got into my car and just sat there for a minute, my hand shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to breathe. How could I have been so blind? For the next few days, her messages were relentless apologies, excuses, pleas for another chance. I ignored them all. I did not owe her an explanation. Eventually, the messages stopped. I blocked her number and tried to forget the woman who had almost convinced me she was real. Ashworth District. Just go. Go now. I gasped at the cab driver, my voice ragged as I slammed the heavy door shut behind me. Adrenaline coursed through me like a jolt of electricity, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pressed my face against the cool glass of the window, staring into the rain-slicked, neon-streaked streets, half expecting to see Julian standing on the curb, his expression one of confusion or worse, anger. I did not dare look back. I just needed distance, as much of it as I could get, as quickly as possible. How had a simple date devolved into a frantic escape? It started, as these things so often do, on Glimmer. His profile was a masterclass in curated charm-witty, confident, just the right amount of self-deprecation. His name was Julian, and after a few days of engaging conversation, he suggested dinner. He was insistent, almost aggressively so. I'll pick a great spot. Head typed, it's on me. He made such a production out of treating me to a nice evening that, despite a small, nagging voice of caution in the back of my mind, I found myself agreeing. I chalked his pushiness up to enthusiasm, a forgivable offense. I was wrong. The first crack in his charming facade appeared before I'd even arrived at the restaurant. A text message lit up my phone as I was walking the last 2 blocks, the city lights reflecting off the damp pavement. By the way, am not eating tonight. Had a massive slice of pizza earlier, so am full. I stopped dead on the sidewalk, rereading the message. Who plans a dinner date, insists on paying, and then decides a pregame with pizza? It was bizarre, a baffling breach of basic social etiquette. But I was already there, so I pushed down my annoyance and tried to keep an open mind. The restaurant had chosen was a warm, inviting space, filled with a low hum of conversation and the clinking of wine glasses. I found him already seated at a small table in the back, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. I sat down, and he immediately launched into an exhaustive monologue about his day at work, barely pausing to let me get a word in. When the server approached, a wave of awkwardness washed over me. I felt strange ordering a full meal while he watched, so I opted for something light, a calamari appetizer. He waved the server away with a theatrical gesture. "Oh, I'm good," he announced loudly. Like I said, not hungry. The food arrived, a beautiful plate of golden, crispy calamari. As I picked up my fork, he leaned across the table, his eyes gleaming. Mind if I try one? Before I could form a response, had already plucked a piece from the plate and popped it into his mouth. Then another and another. Within minutes, he had devoured more than half of my appetizer, the one I had ordered specifically because he was not eating. "Wow," he said with a smirk, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "These are actually really good." I just stared, the sheer audacity of it leaving me speechless. If he was not hungry, why was he methodically consuming my dinner? I tried to laugh it off, telling myself he was just socially inept. He was not. He was just the worst. When the bill arrived, the evening somehow managed to get even more uncomfortable. He made a grand spectacle of paying, pulling his wallet out with a dramatic flourish and holding it aloft as if it were a trophy. "Even though you ordered more," he said, his smirk returning, "a gentleman always pays." The condescension in his voice made my skin crawl. First, I had barely eaten anything thanks to his unsolicited help. Second, The way he framed it as a magnanimous favor was utterly repulsive. I forced a tight-lipped smile and muttered a thank you, my only thought being to get out of there. We walked out into the cool night air, and I was fully prepared to part ways. But he turned to me, his expression expectant. Let's go for another drink. I tried to be polite, but firm. I actually have to be up early tomorrow. I really appreciate dinner, though any normal person would have taken the hint. But he was not a normal person. He kept pushing. Come on, just one more. There's a great little speakeasy just down the street. You'll love it. Panic began to set in. His insistence, his complete disregard for my refusal, made me feel cornered, trapped. I did not want to walk anywhere with him, but I also did not want to cause a scene. Then, like a miracle, the yellow glow of a taxi's headlights cut through the darkness. Without a second thought, I threw my hand out. The cab slowed to a stop, and I turned to him, my voice now cold and firm. Good night, Julian, before he could protest. I dove into the back seat and shouted my destination to the driver, leaving him standing alone on the wet pavement. His hands reached out, trying to steady me as I flailed, my rental skates carving chaotic. Ugly gashes into the pristine surface of the ice. A raw panic was clawing its way up my throat. I was teetering on the brink of disaster, my legs refusing to obey any command from my brain. Just relax, Owen said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in my sea of terror. But I couldn't. The harder I tried to find my balance, the more uncoordinated and spastic my movements became. And then it happened. One wrong shift of weight, one misplaced foot, and I was going down, hard. As I fell, my arm shot out in a desperate, instinctual grab for stability, and I took him down with me. We landed in a tangled, undignified heap on the cold, unforgiving ice. A sharp, stinging humiliation washed over me as a group of kids, no older than 10, zipped past us, their laughter echoing in the cavernous rink. I wished the ice would crack open and swallow me whole. When he dropped me off later that evening, the easy warmth that had existed between us was gone, replaced by a polite, impenetrable distance. So when the text arrived today, Lattery, don't think this is going to work, Hoodie knew, with a sinking heart, that ID ruined it. But that wasn't even the worst part. 3 days later, the deep, throbbing ache in my hip had blossomed into a sharper, more insistent pain, and I found myself sitting in the sterile waiting room of Blackwood Urgent Care, wondering how a supposedly cute date had gone so catastrophically wrong. It was supposed to be a perfect winter date, a chance to do something fun and different. Owen and I had been out a few times before, and everything had been going remarkably well. He was funny and easygoing, with a light-hearted energy that made everything feel effortless. So, when Head suggested ice skating in the neighboring town of Frosthaven, I didn't hesitate. It'll teach you, Head said behind his ear. I used to do a bit of figure skating when I was a kid. I'm sure he envisioned a romantic, movie-esque scene, him gliding backward, holding my hands, guiding me gracefully around the rink as our laughter echoed and soft. Picturesque snow fell outside. The reality, however, was a clumsy, painful disaster. I had never been on ice skates in my life, a fact I had made abundantly clear from the start. I'm probably going to be terrible, ID warned him, laughing to cover my genuine anxiety. ITLL will be fine, Head said, brushing off my concerns. It'll help you. When we arrived at the rink, I was hit with a conflicting wave of excitement and pure dread. It looked magical, with colored lights strung overhead, and couples gliding effortlessly to the cheerful music. But the moment I stepped onto the ice, all that magic evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard terror. Imagine a newborn deer on a frozen lake, legs splayed out in every conceivable direction, eyes wide with horror. That was me, but significantly less graceful. I could not coordinate my feet. My attempts to find my balance only resulted in more violent wobbling. It felt as if gravity had a personal vendetta against me, yanking me down with cruel, invisible force. It did not take long for the first fall to happen. "Are you okay?" he asked, a laugh in his voice as he helped me back to my feet. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile, but inside, I was utterly mortified. It only got worse. Children who had wobbled onto the ice at the same time as me were now zooming past, showing off their newfound skills. Meanwhile, I was still struggling to take a single step without collapsing into a heap. Every time Owen tried to guide me, holding my hands and encouraging me to relax, I would overthink everything, my body refusing to cooperate. Just keep your knees bent, he'd say, his patience clearly wearing thin. Stop overthinking it. It was easy for him to say. He moved with a natural fluid grace, a stark contrast to my near-constant state of impending collapse. And then came the moment that sealed my fate. He was holding my hands, pulling me gently along, and for one fleeting, glorious second, I thought I was actually getting the hang of it. But then my skate caught a rough patch in the ice, and I lost what little control I had. I went down, yanking him with me. The impact was brutal. I landed squarely on my hip, the shock of it radiating through my entire body. He landed half on top of me, his knee jamming painfully into my side. I groaned, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of my embarrassment. We untangled ourselves and got to our feet, but the mood had irrevocably shifted. The cute, romantic date he had envisioned was officially a disaster. By the time we left the rink, I was battered, bruised, and emotionally defeated. The text I received the next day was no surprise, but it still stung. My disastrous performance had cost me something that could have been good, and now, sitting in this uncomfortable plastic chair, waiting for an X-ray, I couldn't help but feel utterly ridiculous. Her eyes, a deep, thoughtful brown, darted between me and the glowing screen of my phone as I replayed the video for what must have been the 6th time. I was gesturing wildly, my voice a little too loud for the quiet ambience of the coffee shop, pointing out what I considered to be the critical moments of the fight. See that jab? That was solid, I explained, but right after, my footwork got sloppy. Look, I overextended here, and that is when he caught me with the counter. I was so lost in my own world, so consumed by the obsessive need to dissect every second of the MMA match ID fought the night before, that I did not even notice how quiet she had become. She was sitting across from me at the small wooden table, a half-empty mug of tea cooling in her hands, politely nodding whenever I paused for breath. In my mind, I was sharing something I was passionate about, something deeply personal. But when I finally looked up from my phone, truly looked at her for the first time in what felt like an eternity, her expression said it all. It was not just disinterest. It was not even annoyance. She just looked done. And in that moment of crushing clarity, I knew she had every right to be. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the night I single-handedly sabotaged what could have been a great date. ID met Maya a few weeks earlier, and we'd hit it off immediately. She was smart and funny, and possessed an incredible, vibrant energy that was utterly captivating. After a bit of back and forth, we finally set a date. I was genuinely excited, a little nervous, but in a good way. The night before we were supposed to meet, however, I had a competitive MMA match. I'd been training for months, pouring countless hours into the gym, and the fight itself was grueling. It wasn't my best performance, far from it, but it was one of those fights that gets under your skin, the kind you can't stop replaying in your mind. And in my case, I was replaying it quite literally. My coach had filmed the entire thing, and I had spent the better part of the night watching on a loop, analyzing every single mistake, every missed opportunity. By the time my date with Maya rolled around the next afternoon, I was still completely consumed by it. I could not stop thinking about what I had done wrong, what I needed to work on, how I could have been better. Looking back, I should have called a friend to vent or gone over the footage with my coach. Instead, I brought all of that obsessive, frustrated energy with me to the date. We met at a cozy little spot in the Old Town district called the Daily Grind, the kind of place with low lighting and mismatched armchairs that's perfect for a first date. Except I never really allowed the date to begin. The conversation never had a chance to breathe. She asked how my week had been, and I casually mentioned the fight, intending to share a brief story. But once I started, I could not stop. I told her about the exhausting training camp, the pre-fight nerves, the adrenaline dump of stepping into the cage. Then, I launched into a blow-by-blow account of the fight itself. Before I knew it, I had my phone out, the video playing on the small screen between us. At first, she seemed genuinely interested, or at least polite enough to feign it. But as I went on, narrating every punch and takedown attempt, I could feel her attention drifting. She shifted in her seat, her gaze wandering to the clock on the wall, to the other patrons laughing and talking at the tables around us. Still, I did not get the hint. I thought I was being passionate, sharing an important part of my life. In reality, I was hogging the entire conversation, turning our first date into my own personal post-fight therapy session. She managed to get in maybe 2 sentences the entire time. One was, "That sounds intense," and the other was something about how she would never been to a live fight before. I nodded absently, barely registering her words before diving right back into my obsessive analysis. When the date finally, mercifully ended, I walked her to her car, still blissfully unaware of how badly I had messed up. She smiled politely and said, "Thanks for the coffee," and I genuinely thought we would be setting up a second date soon. But then nothing. No texts, no calls. Complete and total silence. At first, I was confused. What had gone wrong? Had I said something to offend her? And then it hit me with the force of a clean counterpunch. I did not let her talk. I replayed the date in my head just like the fight, and the realization was brutal. I had completely monopolized the conversation, talking at her instead of with her. I had not asked a single question about her interests, her life. I'd been so wrapped up in my own world that I had forgotten the entire point of a date to connect with the other person. I deserved to be ghosted, no question. It was a harsh but necessary lesson in self-awareness. "You just described your ideal sexual experience," he said, a sly, predatory grin spreading across his face. He leaned back in his chair, basking in the supposed cleverness of his own line. My stomach coiled into a tight, cold knot. My face must have betrayed my horror, because he quickly tried to smother the comment with a forced, hollow laugh. But the damage was done. The air between us had turned sour, thick with a silent, creeping dread. My brain was screaming, a high-pitched, frantic alarm, "Get out. Get out now." Yet, for a few agonizing seconds, I remained frozen in my seat, trying to process the sheer, jarring wrongness of what he had just said. Let me take you back to the beginning of one of the weirdest, most unsettling dates of my life. It began on a dating app, as these things so often do. His name was Caleb, and his profile was a masterfully crafted illusion of charm and mystery. He claimed to be from the States, and his photos were a perfect collage of Americana shot at him in a faded plaid shirt, another leaning against a classic muscle car, and one at what looked like a 4th of July barbecue, a half-eaten hot dog in his hand. He had cultivated a rugged, all-American vibe that, I'll admit, intrigued me. We met for drinks at a small, dimly lit bar in the old Port District of Black Harbor, the kind of place that smelled of salt and old wood. He greeted me with a wide, confident smile and that unmistakable American accent I'd heard in his voice messages. It was almost too perfect. As we settled into a secluded booth, he began to pepper me with questions, his focus intense and unwavering. Then, out of nowhere, the conversation pivoted to amusement parks. "Do you like roller coasters?" he asked, his eyes lighting up with a strange intensity. I was caught off guard but answered honestly, "I suppose so. I like the ones that are fast and a little bit scary," ID said, thinking nothing of it. That's when his charming facade cracked, and the grinning predator underneath looked out, as if his grotesque comment was not enough. He then launched into what could only be described as a full-blown confession, his tone shifting to one of mock seriousness. "So, there is something I should tell you," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My guard was now fully up. "I am not actually from the US." I just blinked at him, the words not quite registering. Yeah, he said, grinning as if he were sharing the punchline to a hilarious joke. I am from Oak Haven. I have never even been to America. I was stunned. His entire persona, his voice, his stories, his meticulously crafted dating profile was a complete fabrication. He had not just stretched the truth, he had constructed an elaborate, detailed lie about his entire identity. So the accent, I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. Oh, I just picked it up from watching movies and stuff, he said. So casually it was chilling, as if faking an entire nationality was a perfectly normal thing to do. A wave of nausea washed over me. This man had lied about who he was from the moment we matched, and now he was sitting across from me, laughing about it as if it were some harmless, amusing prank. I knew I had to get out of there. I downed the rest of my drink in one go, stood, and grabbed my bag. Well, I said, my voice cold and steady. This has been something. I was out the door before he could say another word. The sound of the bell above the door announcing my escape as I disappeared into the cold, dark streets of Black Harbor. She stared at me from across the small cafe table, a polite, unwavering smile fixed on her face as I stumbled through what must have been my 10th clumsy attempt to start a conversation. My palms were sweating, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs as the silence between us stretched, growing more painful with each passing second. So I tried again, leaning forward as if proximity might somehow bridge the linguistic chasm that separated us. But no, she just tilted her head, her expression one of pleasant confusion, clearly not understanding a single word I was saying. I could not believe this was happening. A blind date, arranged by my father of all people. I had expected it to be how Cordy was 17. After all, but this was a whole new level of excruciating. So, this is how it began. I was living in the sprawling, unfamiliar city of Iridian at the time, trying to navigate the treacherous waters of being a teenager in a new country. My dad, for reasons that remain a mystery to me, had decided that what I needed was a blind date. He knew a family from Poland, friends of a colleague, and their daughter, Anya, was my age. She's sweet, Head said, a knowing grin spreading across his face as he handed me her number. I think you'll like her. I didn't think much of it. Dating opportunities were not exactly lining up at my door, so I figured, why not? How bad could it be? The day of the date. I was a nervous wreck, but I tried to remain optimistic. My dad's intel was sparse, she was polished, had recently moved to Viridian, and didn't speak much of the local language. No problem. I thought we could always fall back on English. When I met her at the cafe, however, I realized a catastrophic flaw in my assumption. She was sweet, just as my dad had promised. She smiled a lot, nodded enthusiastically whenever I spoke, and seemed genuinely happy to be there. But it became terrifyingly clear within the first 5 minutes that we shared no common language. She didn't speak a word of English, and my polished vocabulary consisted of exactly 0 words. The date quickly devolved into a painful, protracted comedy of errors. I tried everything I could think of to communicate. I gestured wildly, pointing at items on the menu and saying their names in our local dialect, hoping for a flicker of recognition. She would just nod and smile, probably wondering why I was behaving like a contestant in a high-stakes game of charades. At one point, in a fit of desperation, I resorted to using a translation app on my phone, typing out basic questions and holding the screen up for her to read. She would giggle and nod, but the conversation was a sterile, robotic exchange that went absolutely nowhere. It was like trying to have a heart-to-heart through a thick, soundproof wall. To make matters worse, the cafe was bustling, and I could feel the curious stares of the other patrons. They must have thought they were witnessing the most awkward first date in human history. And they were right. But hey raised the strange thing, Anya seemed to be having a wonderful time. Every time I dared to look up from my phone, she was beaming at me, her eyes bright with what looked like genuine excitement. It was as if she was completely oblivious to the cringe-inducing awkwardness of it all. Or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, She wasn't the one sweating through his shirt and mentally counting down the seconds until he could make a polite escape. When the date finally, mercifully ended, I walked her to the bus stop. She said something in Polish, which I assumed was thank you, and waved cheerfully as she boarded the bus, her smile as bright as ever. I went home, ready to chalk the whole thing up as a one-time disaster. But then my dad sat me down, a smug, self-satisfied expression on his face. "So," he said, leaning forward like a man about to deliver a triumphant punchline. "How did it go?" I groaned, burying my face in my hands. It was a train wreck. We couldn't even talk to each other. "Oh, really?" he said, barely suppressing a grin. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't asking because he cared about my date. He was asking because he had set the whole thing up for himself. The real reason Head sent me on this linguistic suicide mission wasn't for my benefit. It was so he could have an excuse to spend time with her mother. While I was floundering in a sea of awkward silence, he and her mom were having coffee, laughing and chatting, and, judging by his smug expression, having a much, much better time than I was. "That's insane, you know that," he said, narrowing his eyes as I peeled a banana. His tone wasn't playful or curious. It was sharp, laced with genuine, baffling disgust, as if I had just committed some unspeakable culinary crime. I froze, the banana halfway to my mouth, a nervous laugh catching in my throat. Excuse me," I asked, assuming it had to be a joke. But his expression was dead serious. He was not laughing. He was not even smiling. "Who eats a banana with coffee?" he repeated, his voice dripping with a bizarre, condescending judgment. I stared at him, my mind racing. Was this some kind of strange, elaborate test? The way he looked at me, as if I had just sprouted a second head, was deeply unsettling. It was just a banana, for crying out loud, not a live scorpion. Let me backtrack. I matched with Reese on a dating app, and his profile was a curated masterpiece of everything I thought I was looking for. He presented himself as open-minded, politically progressive, and adventurous. His bio was a poetic ode to travel, learning about new cultures, and embracing the richness of human experience. His photos showed him hiking in remote, exotic landscapes, sampling street food in bustling foreign markets, and smiling with locals from around the globe. He came across as someone deeply curious about the world, someone who welcomed and celebrated differences. Our initial conversations were charming. He asked thoughtful questions, shared captivating stories from his travels, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. So, when he suggested we meet for lunch, I readily agreed. The cafe he chose was a trendy little spot in the arts district of Greystone, with mismatched furniture and a menu handwritten on a large chalkboard. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table by the window, and he waved me over with a warm, inviting smile. At first, everything seemed fine. We ordered our food, made the usual small talk, and traded travel anecdotes. But as the conversation wore on, a subtle but persistent feeling of unease began to creep in. It started with the way he constantly interrupted me. Every time I began to share a story or an opinion, he would cut me off, either to offer his own, somehow superior story, or to subtly correct my perspective. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to first date nerves, but the dismissive pattern became more and more obvious. And then came the banana incident. ID ordered a coffee with my lunch, and I brought a banana from home as a quick snack. It was not a statement, just a simple, practical choice. But when I pulled the banana out of my bag, he stared at it as if I had just unveiled a live hand grenade. "You're gonna eat that with coffee?" he asked, his tone incredulous. "Yeah," I said, peeling it. "Why not?" He shook his head, letting out a short, condescending laugh. "That is just weird." I shrugged, trying to keep the mood light. "I guess, but it works for me." "No, it is insane," he insisted, leaning back in his chair with an air of finality. Like, who does that? The way he said it, with such genuine, unironic judgment, caught me completely off guard. It was as though my simple snack choice was a final piece of evidence he needed to confirm that I was a fundamentally flawed and possibly deranged human being. I tried to laugh it off, but the atmosphere had soured. He kept bringing it up throughout the rest of our lunch, making little comments about how wild I was, how I had never met anyone so out there. It wasn't flattering, it was deeply unnerving. After lunch, I left feeling unsettled, but immensely relieved that it was over. I assumed that would be the end of it, but about an hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Hey, I do not think this is going to work out. You are a little too out there for me. Honestly, I find you kind of intimidating." I stared at the message, a hot flush of anger rising in my chest. Intimidating. For eating a banana with coffee. For having opinions he could not control. The hypocrisy was staggering. The man whose profile screamed open-minded global adventurer was, in reality, so rigid and judgmental that he could not handle a snack choice that deviated from his own narrow view of what was acceptable. I sat there, my phone clutched in my hand, the screen casting a pale, ghostly light on my face in the dim coffee shop. The message ID just sent you okay floated in the digital void, unanswered. A cold, heavy feeling began to settle in my chest, a slow-dawning realization that was far worse than simple rejection. I glanced towards a glass door where she had disappeared minutes earlier, arm in arm with a ghost from her past. What was happening? Was this some kind of cruel, elaborate prank? I replayed the last hour in my mind, a frantic, desperate search for the exact moment everything had gone so horribly wrong. This was my first date. Ever. I was 18, fresh out of my junior year of high school in the sprawling, indifferent city of Crestfall, and completely clueless about the intricate, unspoken rules of dating. Her name was Clara, a friend of a friend, and she was smart, funny, and so beautiful it made my stomach ache. I thought she was completely out of my league. Our conversations leading up to this night had been electric, filled with easy laughter and late-night texts. When I finally worked up the courage to ask her out, she had said yes, and I was ecstatic. She suggested a cozy coffee house called the Steam Shadow Cafe, and it seemed perfect. A low-pressure place where we could just talk. I'd even plan a whole series of mini-dates for afterward ice cream, a walk through Willow Creek Park, maybe even a browse to the old bookstore on the corner. When I arrived, she was already there, a silhouette against the rain-streaked window. She smiled when she saw me, and for a fleeting, perfect moment, all my nervous energy dissolved. But the feeling did not last. The first red flag, small but insistent, appeared almost immediately. With a sheepish, almost practiced laugh, she mentioned that her former fling, a guy named Dante, worked at this very coffee shop. I totally forgot, she said, brushing it off with an awkward wave of her hand. I remember forcing a laugh, trying to play it cool. "No, big deal," I said, even as a tight knot formed in my stomach. She had chosen this place. It felt like too much of a coincidence, a calculated move, but I did not want to seem paranoid or insecure, so I let it go. We ordered our coffees and sat down, and for a little while, it was fine. She told me about her summer plans and her dream of traveling. But then, about halfway through conversation, her attention began to drift, her focus shifting from me to the bright screen of her phone. I tried not to let it bother me, but the silences between us grew longer, more cavernous. Was I boring her? Was she texting her friends about how badly the date was going? My gut was screaming that this was a bad sign, but I was so desperate for my first date to be a success that I ignored it. The moment the evening truly began to unravel came about an hour in. She asked if I wanted anything else, and I shook my head, assuming she was just going to the restroom or making a call. But instead, she walked straight over to the counter, to the guy behind the bar, to Dante. At first, I thought she was just being friendly, saying a quick hello. But then they stepped outside together, into the deepening twilight. I watched through the window as she leaned in close, her body language too familiar, her laughter too easy. My chest tightened. What were they talking about? I tried to give her the benefit of the in doubt, but my anxiety was a roaring fire in my chest. I waited, trying not to look like the pathetic kid sitting alone at a table for two, the minutes stretching into an eternity. Finally, I sent a text, trying for a playful tone, get lost on the way back. No response. A few more agonizing minutes passed. "You okay?" Still nothing. I glanced out the window, scanning the sidewalk, but they were gone. She had walked out with him, and she was not coming back. The realization hit me like a physical blow. ID been ditched. On my very first date. The humiliation was overwhelming, a hot flush that spread from my neck to my face. I felt every pair of eyes in the coffee shop on me, even though I knew no one was probably paying attention. My face burning. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the door, the bell above it chiming my lonely, pathetic exit. I sat in the plush, worn-out seat of the movie theater, the darkness a heavy blanket around me, my phone screen casting a faint, anxious glow on my lap. 7:25 p.m. He was now officially 25 minutes late. There had been no text, no call, just a profound and unsettling radio silence. The theater was beginning to fill up, the shadows of other patrons shuffling past me, their quiet murmurs a stark contrast to the frantic churning in my stomach. It was not nerves anymore, it was a cold, simmering frustration. When he finally made his grand entrance, lumbering down the aisle with an air of unearned importance, I almost did not recognize him. He looked nothing like his pictures. Nothing. The man in the photos had been charmingly rugged, with a lean build and a warm smile. The man now squeezing past a row of annoyed moviegoers was at least 80 pounds heavier, his hair greasy and unkempt. And the smell, it hit me like a physical wall. A pungent, sour odor of sweat and something else, something vaguely unwashed, that made my eyes water. He collapsed into the seat next to me, barely mumbling an apology for his tardiness. And in that moment, I knew this was going to be a very, very long night. Let me take you back to the beginning. ID met Gideon on a dating app, and his messages had been perfectly pleasant. He was funny, polite, and his photos depicted a handsome, outdoorsy man. There were no obvious red flags. So when he suggested a movie, I thought, why not? It was low pressure, casual. Looking back, I wish I had trusted the initial flicker of annoyance at his lateness and simply left. The plan had been simple: meet outside the theater, maybe grab some popcorn and enjoy a movie. ID arrived a few minutes early, my excitement a low, pleasant hum. But as the minutes crawled by, that excitement soured into a bitter cocktail of irritation and embarrassment. When he finally appeared, any lingering hope I had for the evening vanished. He was flushed and sweating, as if he had just run a marathon to get there. He barely made eye contact as he settled into the seat, and the sheer force of his body odor was staggering. It wasn't a subtle thing, it was an oppressive, all-consuming presence. I plastered a polite, tight-lipped smile on my face, but inside, I was screaming. How was I supposed to endure a 2-hour movie sitting next to this? The film started, and I tried desperately to lose myself in the story, but it was impossible. He was a constant, fidgety presence, each movement wafting his scent in my direction like a cruel, targeted attack. At one point, he leaned over to whisper something about the plot, his breath hot and sour against my ear. I nodded, not having heard a word he said, and prayed he wouldn't speak again. When the credits finally rolled, I shot out of my seat, a prisoner making a break for freedom. But he followed me, his voice cutting through the exiting crowd. The moment we stepped out into the cool night air, he launched into a bitter, unsolicited monologue about his ex-wife. She was crazy, he spat, the venom in his voice startling. Couldn't handle my success. Always nagging, always complaining. Women are just like that. I guess. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Who starts a first date with a vitriolic rant about their ex? It was not just awkward, it was deeply alarming. He went on, painting himself as a long-suffering victim, and the more he talked, the more I realized this was not just one red flag. It was a whole damn parade of them. When he finally paused for breath, I seized my opportunity. Look, I said, my voice calm but firm, I don't think this is going to work out. Best of luck to you." His face fell, a mass of confusion and offense, but I didn't stick around to analyze his reaction. I turned and walked away, my heart pounded with a mixture of anger, disgust, and profound relief. The moment I got home, I blocked his number and unmatched him on the app. Sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I replayed the night in my head, cringing at every detail. The lateness, the deception of his photos, the smell, the unhinged rant about his ex. What still chills me is his complete and utter lack of self-awareness. He genuinely seemed to believe his behavior was acceptable. It wasn't just a disappointing date. It was a terrifying glimpse into how easily people can hide their true, monstrous self behind a carefully curated online persona. "I just want to punch their teeth in," he said, his voice a low, menacing rumble, as if he were confessing a dark, intimate secret he expected me to understand, to agree with. I froze, my hands wrapped so tightly around my coffee cup that my knuckles ached. His words seemed to hang in the air, a toxic cloud that drowned out the cheerful hum of the bustling cafe. Did I hear him right? I glanced around, half expecting anyone, to have overheard, to intervene. But of course, no one had. I was alone in this with him. I forced a nervous, brittle laugh, the kind you use when you are too shocked to do anything else. He did not even notice. He was already launching into another story, his voice rising, his hands gesturing wildly as he described, with a disturbing relish, the fights had been in, the people had thrown out of bars. All I could think was, I need to get out of here. Now, let me rewind and explain how I ended up on the most unsettling date of my life. ID met Roman on Glimmer. His profile was generic, nothing special, but he seemed normal enough. Decent photos, a vague bio about enjoying fitness and having a good time. Nothing that screamed potential psychopath. After a few days of unremarkable conversation, he suggested meeting for coffee. "Sure," ID said, thinking it was a safe, low-pressure option. A quick coffee is easy to escape if things go south. I had no idea just how desperately I would want to escape. The first red flag appeared beforehand, even sat down. He walked into the gilded mug straight from the gym, still clad in his workout gear. His shirt was damp with sweat, and the smell of his exertion hit me a full second before he reached the table. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but internally, I was cringing. Who shows up to a first date like that? "Sorry," he said, dropping heavily into the chair across from me. Didn't have time to shower. I wanted to leave right then and there, but I told myself to be polite. Maybe he was just a little clueless. Then he started talking. For the next half an hour, he held me captive with a relentless, one-sided monologue about his job as a bouncer. At first, I thought it was just standard first date small talk. But it quickly became clear that he was not just sharing anecdotes, he was bragging about his capacity for violence. "I threw this one guy out so hard, he hit the pavement face first," he said, laughing loudly as he mimed the motion. "You should have seen the blood. My stomach churned." He continued, story after story, a highlight reel of aggression and dominance. His voice grew louder with each tale, his gestures more exaggerated, his language more profane. At one point, he actually stood up to act out one of his favorite takedowns, shouting and flailing his arms as if we were in the middle of a bar brawl, instead of a quiet, respectable coffee shop. The other patrons turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of amusement and alarm. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. And then he delivered the line that made my blood run cold. He was ranting about drunk people, specifically women who get, in his words, hysterical. He rolled his eyes, a look of profound disgust on his face. "I hate drunk, hysterical girls," he spat. "They're so annoying. Honestly, sometimes I wish I could just punch their teeth in." My heart stopped. The casual, matter-of-fact way he said it, with such genuine conviction, sent an icy chill down my spine. This wasn't a bad joke or a thoughtless comment. He meant it. I looked at him, trying to hide the panic that was rising in my chest like a flood. Did he have any idea how terrifying he sounded? Did he even care? That was it. I couldn't stay another second. I made a flimsy excuse about an early morning and practically ran out of the cafe, my heart pounding against my ribs. The next day, I got a message from him. "Thought I scared you off," it read, followed by a laughing emoji. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. He thought it was funny. He thought his violent, misogynistic fantasies were amusing. I did not reply. I just blocked him, a small, desperate act of self-preservation against a man whose darkness I had only just begun to glimpse. I stood in the center of her living room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, caught in a disorienting vortex of frustration and a primal, creeping fear. The digital clock on the cable box glowed a malevolent red 6 o'clock a.m. I'd been awake all night, pacing the worn, stained carpet of her apartment, a prisoner in a cage of her drunken whims. My car keys were gone, and she, Kara, was slurring something about it being for my own good, her bloodshot eyes holding a smug, misplaced sense of heroism. I tried to reason with her, but it was like arguing with a brick wall. A drunk, smiling, manipulative brick wall. "You're drunk," Shed mumbled, her words stumbling over each other. "You can't drive." I wasn't, not even close. But there I was, trapped, completely at her mercy. This whole nightmare began with a match on Glimmer, a rookie mistake. I know, but at the time it seemed harmless. Her name was Kara, and her profile was a collage of cute selfies and a witty, self-deprecating bio. After a few days of easy, flirtatious messages, we decided to meet. She suggested I come to her place in the neighboring city of Port Jericho first, and then we'd head out to a bar nearby. It was a 90-minute drive, but I was young and optimistic, and I figured the long drive would be worth it. When I arrived, the first red flag, a massive, glaring one, hit me square in the face. The confident, polished woman from her profile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the person who answered the door was wearing stained sweatpants, her hair a tangled mess, her entire demeanor already slightly off-kilter. Still, I told myself not to be so judgmental. First impressions are not always accurate, right? We went to a popular dive bar downtown called the Rusty Anchor, and I held on to a sliver of hope that the night could be salvaged. But before I'd even finished my first beer, she was already on her third, and it was not agreeing with her. By her fourth drink, she was a sloppy, slurring mess, stumbling in her chair and laughing too loudly at her own jokes. Other patrons were starting to stare. It was at that point I knew I had to remain completely sober if I was going to navigate this situation safely. I switched to water, subtly trying to suggest she slow down. "Maybe take it easy," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive, before waving down the bartender for another round. It wasn't fine, not even close. When it became clear she was on a one-way trip to oblivion, I decided to call it a night. I managed to coax her back to her apartment, the entire time reassuring myself that this waking nightmare would soon be over. After getting her inside, I told her I needed to use the restroom before I started the long drive home. While I was in there, I could hear her shuffling around in the living room, the sound of a drawer opening and closing, but I did not think much of it. When I came out, I grabbed my jacket and reached for my keys on the small table by the door, only to find them gone. I froze, a cold dread washing over me. Where are my keys? "Kara," she crossed her arms, a smug, drunken grin spreading across her face. "You're not driving anywhere," she said, her voice a triumphant slur. "You're drunk." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm not drunk," I said, my voice tight with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Eve been drinking water for the last 2 hours because you're drunk. Give me my keys." But she just shook her head, her self-righteousness impenetrable. For the next hour, we went back and forth, my calm reasoning met with her drunken, circular logic. "You have 2 options," she finally declared, swaying slightly. You can sleep in my bed, or you can sleep on the couch. My stomach churned at the implication. It'll take the couch, I said quickly, my voice steady despite the chaos raging inside me. I spent the next 4 hours on that lumpy, uncomfortable couch, wide awake, listening to her snores from the other room, my mind racing. How had things spiraled so far out of control? By 6 o'clock a.m., ID had enough. I got up, banged on her bedroom door, and demanded my keys. When she finally stumbled out, still half asleep and disoriented, she had the audacity to act as if I were the one being unreasonable. I tore her living room apart, my frustration mounting with every passing second. Finally, I turned to her, my voice shaking with rage. "Kara, where are my keys?" She hesitated for a moment, then reached into the pocket of her sweatpants and pulled them out with a sheepish grin. "Here," she said, as if it were no big deal. No apology, no explanation, nothing. I snatched the keys from her hand, walked out the door without a word, and did not look back. The moment I was in my car, I locked the doors, took a deep, shuddering breath, and sped away, leaving Port Jericho and its resident psycho in my rear-view mirror. "I wasn't even going to ask you out," he said, his tone utterly matter-of-fact as he shoveled another spoonful of cheap ice cream into his mouth. "It didn't seem like you were going anywhere in life. But my mom said I should." I blinked, the fluorescent lights of the dreary ice cream parlor flickering above us, casting a harsh, sickly glow on the sticky tabletop. His words replayed in my head, each one a small, sharp cut. I was stunned into silence, unsure if I had heard him correctly. And yet, somehow it got worse. Let me take you back to the beginning of this waking nightmare. I was 25, working a dead-end job at a greasy fast food joint in the industrial part of Harrogate, trying to figure out what to do with my life. One afternoon, a guy my age came in with his mother. He seemed polite enough, offering a shy smile as I handed him their order. A few days later, he came back alone and asked me out for ice cream. I was surprised but flattered. His name was Leo, and he seemed sweet, so I thought, why not? I went home and spent far too long getting ready, curling my hair and picking out a new outfit, a small, fragile bubble of hope inflating in my chest. When he arrived to pick me up, that bubble burst immediately. He was wearing sweatpants, not the trendy, athletic kind. These were baggy, stained, and worn out, paired with an oversized, faded hoodie. It was as if he had rolled out of bed and could not be bothered to put in even the barest minimum of effort. I tried to push my disappointment aside, telling myself not to be so superficial. Maybe he just was not into fashion. Then he opened his mouth. "I wasn't going to ask you out," he said, shrugging as if it were no big deal. "But my mom told me to give you a chance." I stared at him, my smile frozen on my face. Was that supposed to be a compliment? Was I supposed to be grateful that his mother had convinced him to slum it with me for an evening? Before I could formulate a response, he launched into an excruciatingly detailed monologue about a board game he was designing, apparently inspired by some video game I'd never heard of. For the next 30 minutes, he talked uninterrupted about the game's mechanics, characters, and lore. He did not ask me a single question about myself. He did not even pause long enough for me to interject. I just sat there, nodding along, my ice cream slowly melting into a sad, sugary puddle as I feigned interest. And then, out of nowhere, he dropped a bombshell. "I have a girlfriend," he said casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. I froze, my spoon halfway in my mouth. "Excuse me?" "Yeah," he continued, completely unfazed. "But she's ugly. Like really ugly. I have to fake orgasms when we have sex." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer, unadulterated awfulness of what he was saying. "Who says something like that on a date? She's like a 2 out of 10, he added, shaking his head with a look of profound pity. "But you're a 4, so you're an upgrade." An upgrade? I felt as if I'd been physically slapped. I was questioning every life choice that had led me to this moment, sitting in this dingy ice cream shop with this monstrous human being. But he was not finished. "She's such a starfish in bed," he said, rolling his eyes. "Doesn't do anything. And she doesn't even have a job. Her parents just give her money because they're rich." I sat there in stunned silence, a bizarre cocktail of shock and morbid fascination coursing through me. And the craziest part, I stayed, for reasons I still can't fully comprehend. I did not walk out. Instead, I did the unthinkable. I gave him dating advice. I sat there on what was supposed to be our date and tried to help him figure out how to fix his relationship with his ugly girlfriend. By the time Head finished his ice cream, I was emotionally drained. I thought it couldn't possibly get any worse, but of course, it did. "I have to go," he said, glancing at his phone. "Told my friends I'd be online to play video games." He stood up, dropped a few crumpled bills on the table, and turned to me with a smug grin. "Don't worry about paying me back," he said. "I make a lot of money." And with that, he was gone. I sat there for a long time, trying to process the sheer, unadulterated horror of the last hour. It felt like a fever dream, a surreal, twisted joke. When I finally got up to leave, I made myself a promise I would never again let someone make me feel so small. This happened about 12 years ago, back when I was still navigating the treacherous, often disappointing world of dating. I did had a few creepy encounters, but Victor takes the cake. He was an acquaintance of my brother, Liam, who had met him at a bar a few times. Victor was new to the country, and my brother, being the good guy he is, was showing him around our dreary, industrial city of Iron Haven. Liam set us up, claiming Victor was desperate for a girlfriend. And I guess I was pretty desperate too, because I actually agreed to go on a date with him. That evening was, without a doubt, the worst first date of my entire life. I arrived at the restaurant, a dimly lit place called the Crimson Lantern, to find he was already late. Not a great start, but I let it slide. To be honest, I knew from the moment he walked in that I was not attracted to him, but I was determined to be polite, to at least try to have a nice evening. He started off politely enough. "Two." He held the door, pulled out my chair, all the classic, if a bit outdated, gestures. Then, as we sat in awkward silence, waiting for our server, he started talking about how much his fiancée would have loved this place. The comment took me by surprise, and I, of course, asked about her. He revealed that Head had a fiancée before moving here, but that he had simply left her behind. When I asked why they'd broken up, he said, with a chilling lack of emotion, that they hadn't really. Had just gotten tired of her nagging and decided to move to another country without telling her. I was so stunned I did not know what to say, so I quickly changed the subject. Eventually, our waiter, a kind man with a warm smile and an accent that was unusual for our region, came to take our order. Victor stared at him blankly for a long moment, then turned to me and said, his voice loud and condescending, "Can you understand this guy?" I said that yes. I could understand him just fine, and gave the waiter both of our orders. After he left, my lovely date continued to shock me. "I wouldn't normally leave ordering to the lady," he said, "but that brown guy talked so weirdly." "I didn't get a word," he said. Wow. A racist and a sexist in one breathtakingly offensive sentence. Again, I was speechless for a few moments before a hot wave of anger washed over me. I don't remember my exact words, but it was something along the lines of, "Well, I'm not a lady, so I can order for myself just fine. Thanks. And why are you making racist remarks?" He had the audacity to get annoyed with me, insisting he was not being racist. He just was not used to that kind of person. I pointed out that he would not have met me either if he would just stuck to the people he was used to in his own country. He actually calmed down then and told me he was glad Head met me, which was, given the circumstances, one of the creepiest things he could have said, but we had already ordered. So I decided to see the meal through and then disappear from this man's life forever. I answered a few of his questions, basic small talk, But then he veered into deeply uncomfortable territory, asking about my previous partners, if I was a virgin, and whether or not I would be willing to be a submissive wife. It was then that I realized I was on a date with a religious zealot, and all the pieces of misogyny, the racism, the weirdly controlling attitude clicked into place. "That's none of your business," I said, my voice cold. "And now, I need to leave." I put cash on the table for my half of the meal, plus a tip, and stood up. He told me I was being unreasonable, and that he could not possibly accept my money, as it was an insult to his manhood. Fine. I took my money back and walked out. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. I wasn't even home when my brother started texting me, frantic, saying Victor had called him, sobbing, claiming I had run off for no reason. I explained the whole sordid mess to Liam, and he was just as shocked as I was. After that night, we both tried to cut contact. We blocked him on social media, and Liam blocked his number. But the harassment escalated. He created an endless stream of fake accounts, posting bizarre, detailed descriptions of me, followed by strings of vile insults. Then it got worse. He found my address. One day he was just there, standing outside my house. He begged me to let him in, and when I refused, he grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. He told me I would never find a man who would love me like he did, that I would regret walking away from him, that I would die old and lonely. I screamed at him to get off of me and kicked him hard in the shin. He let go, cursing at me, and I ran inside, locking the door behind me. He started banging on the door, throwing his weight against it, trying to force it open. I was terrified. I called the police, but 20, then 30 minutes passed, and they still hadn't arrived. The lock was beginning to strain. In a panic, I called my brother. About 15 minutes later, he was there. I heard muffled shouting, the sound of a brief struggle, and then silence. The pressure on the door was gone. The next thing I heard were sirens. When I went outside, the police were there, and my brother was standing on the lawn, out of breath and shaken. Victor was gone. Apparently, a neighbor had called the police to report 2 men fighting on my lawn. My brother explained that he had tried to get Victor to leave, and Victor had attacked him. The marks on my door and the testimony of my neighbors were enough to confirm my story. I never saw him again, but the memory of that night, of his face twisted with rage, still haunts me. This was about 6 years ago. I was 22, and the wreckage of my first and only serious relationship was still smoldering around me. That boy had been my first everything, and when he left, he took a part of me with him, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. After a year of aimless drifting and a series of meaningless, self-destructive encounters, I decided to try my hand at actual dating. I met a man named Jax on a dating website. He was a few years older, an ex-Marine with a rugged, handsome face and an easy, confident way with words. After a few days of talking, we decided to meet. I drove to his house, and that's when the first subtle tremor of unease went through me. He lived in a nice, manicured neighborhood called Serenity Hills, but the house itself felt off. It was a rental he shared with a few other guys, and they were the kind of men who seemed to be perpetually shrouded in shadow, their eyes lingering on you a second too long. The house was messy and smelled of stale beer and something else, something vaguely unpleasant. It was my first red flag, a quiet warning that a naive, inexperienced girl like me did not belong in his world. But I was tired of being sad, and he was charming, so I stayed. He greeted me with a warm hug and handed me a motorcycle helmet. I had never been on a motorcycle before, but a part of me, the part that was desperate for a new experience, for anything to feel alive again, was thrilled. I thought, why not? And climbed on behind him. The road he chose was a long, winding ribbon of asphalt known locally as the Devil's Backbone, a notoriously secluded stretch of road that snaked its way through the dense, dark woods outside the city. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its slow, bloody descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. As we roared down that empty road, the trees closing in on either side, The initial thrill began to curdle into a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. It was dead silent out here, the only sound the angry roar of the engine. It was getting dark, and I did not know this man. Alarm bells, loud and frantic, began to scream in my head. I will say, while I made a series of terrible decisions in the story, this is the one moment I am proud of. As the anxiety tightened its icy grip on my chest, I leaned forward and shouted over the wind, "I think we should turn around." He just laughed, a sound that was snatched away by the wind. "Are you scared?" he yelled back. "No," I lied, my voice trembling. I have to be home soon. My parents are expecting me." He did not slow down. He just kept riding forward, deeper into the encroaching darkness. My mind was a chaotic slideshow of horrifying imagism, raped and broken, my body left in a ditch for the crows to find. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Can we please turn back?" Finally, after another terrifyingly long moment, he relented, turned the bike around, and heading back toward the city. The next day, I told myself I had overreacted, that he was harmless. I agreed to a second date. We met at a loud, chaotic sports bar for dinner and beers. The entire time, Jax had his arm wrapped around me like a vice, my body pressed so tightly against his that I could barely breathe. He was constantly trying to kiss me, his movements aggressive and proprietary, and he talked with a chilling certainty about our future together, about how he, as an ex-Marine, would be such a protective boyfriend. I was completely and utterly freaked out. I barely knew this man, but my car was back at his house. I was trapped. When we were done, he insisted I come inside and hang out for a bit. I told myself I would stay for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. We walked into his room, and he was on me in an instant, his mouth crushing mine, his hands everywhere. I kept pushing him away, telling him I needed to go, but I could feel the raw, aggressive energy coming off him, and I knew he was not going to take no for an answer. His arousal was obvious, a clear and present threat. "I'm not letting you leave," he said, his voice a low growl, "until we do something." I had no idea what he was capable of, what he would do if I continued to resist. So, in a moment of cold, calculated terror, I made a decision. My only way out of there was to give him what he wanted. I won't go into the details, but the entire time, I was dying inside, my mind a million miles away, just praying he would finish quickly so I could escape. It was over in a few minutes. I ran out of that room, out of that house, and sped home, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. He tried to contact me again, of course, and when I told him I just wanted to be friends, the charming facade crumbled completely. He began to relentlessly call and text, his messages a chaotic spiral of begging, then calling me a slut for ignoring him, then apologizing profusely, claiming it was only because he liked me so much. I blocked him on everything, a desperate, frantic attempt to erase him from my life. This was a few years ago. I was a freshman at Blackwood University, newly single and just trying to have a bit of fun. I matched with a guy on Glimmer, a 25-year-old named Damien. He was a little odd, but we had similar interests and he went to the same school, so I thought, why not? The red flags, in retrospect, started immediately. The first was his age, a bit older than I was used to, a subtle power imbalance I chose to ignore. The second, and much larger, red flag appeared when I agreed to go on a date with him. He offered to pick me up, but explained that he was out of town, over 200 miles away, for his grandmother's funeral. He would, he assured me, leave the funeral early just to come and get me. It was a grand gesture, but a deeply unsettling one. Still, I went along with it. He showed up in stained sweatpants, a wife beater, and a pair of worn-out flip-flops, a strange choice of attire for someone supposedly coming from a funeral. We had not made any concrete plans, just a vague idea of getting a bite to eat. Since I had been out of town, he said he needed to stop and pick up his dog from a friend's place. I like dogs, so I agreed. It was dark when we pulled up to a grim, sprawling apartment complex on the outskirts of the city of Crow's End. He left me in the car and returned a few minutes later with a massive Rottweiler mix. The dog took one look at me and let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the entire car. I had never had a dog react to me like that before, and a cold tendril of fear snaked its way up my spine. Damien said nothing about the dog's behavior. He just said he wanted to drop him off at his house. It seemed logical, so I agreed. The moment I walked through the front door of his house, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The place was a disaster, a chaotic landscape of filth and neglect. Garbage bags, overflowing with rotting food, were piled up in the entryway. Bottles, wrappers, and old mail littered every available surface. The air was thick with a sour, unpleasant smell. Damien mumbled something about a messy roommate, an excuse that felt thin and unbelievable. After clearing a space on the trash-strewn couch, he asked if I wanted to play chess. I had mentioned in my profile that I was interested in learning, and he seemed eager to teach me. This, too, was a mistake. The lesson began, and his demeanor shifted from laid-back to intensely serious. He explained the game with a rigid, almost militaristic precision, and then began to quiz me on each piece. I got most of the questions wrong, and with every incorrect answer, his frustration grew. He would yell the correct answer at me, his voice sharp and angry. Try again, he would snap, his patience worn down to a nub. I was no longer a date, I was a disappointing student, and his anger was making me deeply uncomfortable. I suggested we do something else, and he proposed watching a movie. The idea of leaving, of going to a neutral, public space to get food, seemed to have been completely forgotten. He told me we could watch the movie in his room, and I, not wanting to anger him further, obliged. He then explained, with no hint of embarrassment, that he had to put clean sheets on the bed. His bedroom was even worse than the living room, and there was no TV. He proceeded to put an action movie on his phone, the tiny screen a pathetic substitute for a real television. We watched for about 10 minutes before things became physical. I won't go into the details, but other things happened, and at the time, they were consensual. But afterward, a profound sense of wrongness washed over me, and I told him I didn't want to have sex. He was confused, but at first, he didn't push it. We moved back into the filthy living room, and I knew I had to leave. It was as if he could read my mind. He exploded. One moment he was calm. The next he was a towering inferno of rage, screaming in my face. I am barely 5 feet tall, and this man, who was well over 6 feet, was screaming at me, his face contorted with a terrifying, unhinged fury. I was internally freaking out, but Maya's single focus was to not make him any angrier. For what felt like an eternity, he screamed at me, demanding to know why I didn't like him, what was wrong with him, why I didn't want him. I tried to placate him, feeding him the old lines, "It's not you, it's me, and no. Of course I don't want to leave." This man was my only ride home, and I was terrified of what he would do if I tried to run. He finally calmed down when he believed I was going to stay, and then suggested we play a video game. I was in full-in survival mode, playing the part of the interested, engaged date, because I was terrified that if he sensed I wanted to leave, he would explode again. After a while, he started to get upset again, this time devolving into a tearful, self-pitying rant about how no one had ever loved him, how his own mother had told him he was worthless. I was a hostage, forced to act as a therapist to my clearly unstable captor. When he finally calmed down again, he offered to make me a drink. My brain screamed, absolutely not. I declined, and when he offered water instead. I declined that too, feigning a lack of thirst. I was trapped there until almost 2 o'clock a.m., too terrified to ask him to take me home. Finally, in a desperate gambit, I let out a loud, exaggerated yawn. "Oh, wow, it's 2 o'clock a.m., I said, my voice artificially bright. "My roommate is going to be so worried about me," I laughed, as if the idea of anyone worrying about me was absurd. "I'm so tired. I should probably get home soon." I was terrified he would freak out again, but he just looked at the clock and agreed that it was late, not wanting to leave anything to chance. I added, "I have a great idea. if I can get to bed soon. I'd love to have breakfast with you on campus tomorrow. I was hoping the offer of a future meeting would convince him that I intended to see him again. It worked. He seemed thrilled at the prospect and walked me to his car. The 10-minute drive back to my dorm was the longest of my life. The silence in the car was heavy, suffocating. I was hyper-aware of every dark street, every underpass. When he dropped me off, I made a show of being tired but excited to see him the next day. I declined his multiple offers to walk me to my door, and the moment I was out of his line of sight, I sprinted to my room and locked the door, my body trembling with a mixture of relief and terror. I genuinely felt as if I had just escaped a serial killer. He begged me to meet up with him for days afterward, but I never saw him again. This is a story about a time I learned that I was far more naive than I ever thought possible. I think we all have a few stories like this from our younger years, cautionary tales that we look back on with a shudder. I was in my early 20s, having dropped out of college, and was working at a call center in the dreary, rain-soaked city of Port Sterling. The pay was surprisingly good, which meant people tended to stay for a long time, and a strange, insular community had formed within the beige-colored walls of our office. It was there that I became friends with a man whose desk was next to mine. I'll call him Brendan. Brendan was about a decade older than me, married with a young daughter. We hit it off immediately. Our friendship forged in a crucible of shared cynicism and sarcasm. We often felt like we were the only two intelligent life forms in a sea of corporate drones, a foolish, arrogant mindset that I am now deeply ashamed of. We started hanging out after work sometimes, grabbing beers at a dingy little pub downtown. Brendan lived in the next town over, a grueling 4-meal commute, and he would often use the excuse of waiting for the horrific evening traffic to thin out to have a few drinks. I was at an age where drinking in a bar still felt like a novel, adult thing to do, so I was always happy to join him. I was never, not for a single moment, attracted to Brendan. To my mind, we were simply work buddies. He was a married father, and even if he hadn't been, his personality would have been a deal breaker. Brendan was relentlessly pushy with his opinions. He was constantly trying to force his favorite books, CDs and DVDs on me, and would then pester me for weeks afterward, demanding to know what I thought. He was always insistent that I agree that whatever he had recommended was a masterpiece, far superior to anything I liked. It may not sound like much, but it was a constant, invalidating barrage that left me feeling small and unheard. We did not have the same taste, so I rarely enjoyed his recommendations. After the second or third time, I simply stopped accepting things from him, but he would still try, pouting like a child when I politely declined. I was eventually fired for some trivial, draconian rule violation, and Brendan took me out for a final round of beers that day. I fully expected to never see him, or any of my other call center co-workers, ever again. A few weeks later, however, I got a text from him on a Saturday night. He said he was in my town and wanted to meet up. I told him no, that I was in for the night. He replied that he had just bought a six-pack and was on his way over. He knocked on my door less than 5 minutes later. I am not the kind of person who appreciates unexpected visitors, and I cursed the fact that I had invited him to a party a few months earlier and given him my address. I could not see a polite way out of it, so I let him in, and we drank a few beers while he prattled on about office gossip I no longer had any interest in. When I started to get tired and asked him to leave, he whined and pouted, insisting it was too early. I practically had to push him out the door. I ghosted Brendan after that. I would get texts from him periodically on Saturday nights. Sometimes a simple, "You home?" And sometimes, more chillingly, I did a drive-by and it looks like your car is gone. "You out?" He even knocked on my door a few times when I was home, and I would hide in the dark, my heart pounding, until he finally left. He had never behaved like this when we worked together, and I could now understand his sudden, intense interest in me. A year and a half after ID last seen him, I ran into him downtown. ID just had lunch with friends and was walking back to my car when I saw him sitting alone outside a cafe. He waved me over, and, against my better judgment, I ended up having a coffee with him. He whined about me ghosting him, and because I was young and foolish, his guilt trip worked. I allowed him to talk me into letting him come over later that evening with beers for a low-key hangout. He showed up with a six-pack and some self-published book by one of his friends that he insisted I had to read. The minute he walked in, he started talking about a scandalous affair between two of our former co-workers. He analyzed every detail of their relationship with an obsessive, almost voyeuristic intensity. I regretted letting him in almost immediately. At some point in the course of his relentless monologue, the word orgasm came up. Brendan seized the opportunity. He leaned forward, a strange, expectant look in his eyes, and said, "When was the last time you had an orgasm that was given to you by someone else?" All the air went out of the room. In that single, horrifying moment, I understood everything. The late-night texts, the unannounced visits, the relentless persistence. He hadn't seen me as a friend. He had seen me as an opportunity. "You need to leave," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I messed up," he replied, a look of surprise on his face. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just wondering. "You need to leave," I repeated. I walked to the front door and opened it. "Leave. Now. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't show up here ever again." He continued to stare at me, a look of genuine disbelief on his face. "Wow," he said, "you're actually mad." I just glared at him, and he finally got the message. He walked slowly to the door, still looking at me as if I were the one who behaved inappropriately. The moment he was over the threshold, I shut the door in his face. He called and left a long, rambling voicemail, which I immediately deleted. He continued to text and call for weeks, and even had the audacity to invite me to a Halloween party he and his wife were throwing. I never spoke to him again. I know this story isn't as overtly terrifying as some, but it could have gone differently. He was in my house, and nobody knew he was there. He had systematically ignored my boundaries for months, and I had foolishly let him back into my life. I thought we were friends. He thought we were going to have an affair. I hope his wife left his dumbit. I was dating a man almost twice my age who I met while working at a dreary, fluorescent grocery store on the industrial outskirts of a town called Barrows Deep. His name was Arthur, and he had a side job that both fascinated and repelled me. He worked for the local morgue, picking up bodies on call. He would transport them, do the necessary paperwork, tag them, and place them in the cold, silent embrace of the freezer. In the beginning, I found what he did admirable. It was a necessary, thankless job, and he presented himself as a deeply caring, empathetic person, the kind of man who could handle the grim realities of death with a gentle, respectful hand. He was, I would soon discover, a creep. The morgue also handled funeral services, and the building was a strange, sterile labyrinth of small, somber viewing rooms and quiet, empty offices. One night, we had made plans to hang out, and he asked me to meet him there. It was late, well after midnight, and the building was deserted. A cold, oppressive silence hung in the air. I had assumed we would meet, and then go somewhere else for food or a drink, but he insisted I come inside. He gave me a tour of the small, sad rooms, their chairs arranged in neat, expectant rows. It was surreal, like walking to the set of a horror movie. Then, he told me to wait in one of the offices and disappeared down a long, echoing hallway. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from him, "Come to the room at the end of the hall." The one we have not been in yet. My curiosity, morbid and ill-advised, got the better of me. I walked down the hall, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence, and pushed open the door. It was the preparation room, the place where they got the bodies ready for the freezer. I did not know that at the time. All I knew was that there, in the center of the room, lying on a steel gurney under the harsh, clinical glare of the overhead lights, was a dead body. An old woman, her skin waxy and pale, her eyes closed as if in peaceful sleep. I froze in the doorway, a wave of shock and revulsion washing over me. I felt like I should be upset, horrified, but Arthur, who was standing on the other side of the gurney, thought it was hilarious. He wanted me to get a closer look. I played along, forcing a detached, clinical curiosity I did not feel. I had seen plenty of gruesome things on the internet, and I told myself this was no different. But it was. This was real. This was a violation. After he had finished his work, he took me into the freezer. There were 7 other bodies in there, zipped into thick, black bags. He unzipped one, revealing the face of another stranger, a silent, frozen testament to a life that was now over. He even showed me the crematorium, the massive oven where the bodies were turned to ash. All of this was in the middle of the night, with no warning, no one else in the building. It was his own private, twisted little show, and I was his unwilling audience. I blocked the memory out for a few months, but it lingered, a dark, toxic stain on my subconscious. It was not until I started having other issues with him, other instances of his profound and disturbing creepiness, that I finally told a friend. It was her horrified reaction that made me realize just how deeply messed up the situation had been. I have since blocked him on everything. Hopefully, he leaves me alone. This was about 4 years ago. I had matched with a man named Elias on Glimmer, and my profile, then as now, made one thing abundantly clear: I was child-free. No kids, no exceptions. His profile said the same. We started texting, and I reiterated my position just to be sure. I did not mind if a man had children, but I had no desire to take on the responsibility of raising them. My life was my own. He claimed to feel the exact same way. We texted for 2 weeks before we met, a strict personal rule of mine. I did my due diligence, of course, checking his social media. It was sparse, but so was mine, so I did not see it as a red flag. He seemed to post with about the same infrequency as I did, and everything appeared to be on the up and up. We had a lot in common. A shared love for a wide range of music, a passion for animals and casual hiking, a deep appreciation for literature. He played the guitar, I played the piano. Honestly, he seemed perfect. We kept things casual for the first month, and then we decided to make it exclusive. We saw each other several times a week for the next 7 months, and everything was wonderful. I met his friends, he met mine, and we made plans to meet each other's families over the upcoming holidays. And then came the talk, the one where you realize you were starting to think about a future with this person, and you need to make sure you are both on the same page about the big things. We were having dinner at his condo, a sleek, modern place in the heart of the city of Silver Creek. I told him about my financial goals, my plan to retire in my early 40s and move to Europe to travel and write and paint. I was trying to delicately broach the subject of his own financial situation. If he was drowning in debt, I needed to know. And then it happened. He took my hand, looked deep into my eyes, and told me there was something he had been keeping from me. My mind immediately went to the worst case scenario, crippling debt. But it was so much worse than that. He had kids, 3 of them. And not only that, he had sole custody. I was stunned into a thick, suffocating silence as he explained that the condo we were currently sitting in was not his, but his single brother's, who had agreed to let him use it for our dates, so his parents could watch his children at his own house. I remained speechless as he explained that he had not told me earlier because he was afraid I would leave him, that he could not bear to lose me because I was the most amazing woman he would ever met. He told me he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me, that I would be an amazing mother to his children because I was so smart and level-headed. This man, this stranger who I thought I knew, then went on to suggest that instead of retiring early, I should sell my house and help him pay off his mortgage, and then we could save to put all 3 of his kids through college. Once they graduated, he explained they could get good jobs and send us to Europe on vacation. I just sat there, staring at him, as he laid out the next few decades of our lives, his face alight with a delusional, excited glow, fully expecting me to be thrilled that he had sprung his secret family on me like some wonderful surprise, a surprise that was the exact opposite of the child-free life I had been explicitly clear about from day one. When I finally found my voice, I did not use it. I just stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out. He followed me, of course, telling me I was overreacting, that we could have an adult conversation. He tried to block me from getting into my car, and I finally turned to him and told him, my voice shaking with rage, that I was 1 second away from calling the police. He finally stepped aside, and I drove away. The next 2 months were a living hell. He, his mother, his father, and his brother all began to harass me relentlessly, blowing up my phone at all hours, showing up at my house and my work, all of them telling me what a horrible, child-hating monster I was for turning down such a great guy. It finally stopped when I went to the police. I did not have enough for a restraining order, but they did send an officer to his house to tell him and his family to leave me alone. He called one last time, leaving me a long, venomous voicemail, telling me I was gonna die a lonely old cat lady, and that I was lucky he had ever given me the time of day, because I was not even that hot anyway. This happened about 4 years ago. I was 25, newly single, and definitely not looking for anything serious. I'd been on Glimmer for a couple weeks, and most of the dates had been fine. Awkward, dull, but nothing that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That all changed when I met Adrian. He messaged me one night with a pretty standard opener, and while he was not the best looking guy on the app, he had an easy, charming vibe in his messages that I liked. He was funny and attentive, and he did not come on too strong. He told me he had recently moved to my city, a sprawling, anonymous place called Ashworth, and did not know many people. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, and I thought, why not? He seems nice enough. We agreed to meet for drinks at a bar not too far from my place. The date started out well. Adrian looked exactly like his photo's average height, dark hair, a little scruffy in a way that was actually quite cute. The conversation flowed easily, and after a couple of drinks, I started to feel comfortable around him. Too comfortable, maybe. After about an hour, he asked if I want to come back to his place. He said it was not far, and that he'd make me one of his famous cocktails. I hesitated. I do not normally go back to a stranger's place on a first date, but he seemed so harmless, so genuine. ID had a little to drink, and my judgment wasn't at its sharpest. I told myself it would be fine. I texted my roommate my location, just in case, and got into his car. The drive was short, maybe 15 minutes, but the further we went, the darker and more desolate the streets became. His apartment turned out to be a small, isolated house at the end of a dark cul-de-sac in a neighborhood called Shadow Creek. There were no lights on in any of the neighboring houses, no cars in the driveways. It felt abandoned. We walked inside, and the first thing I noticed was how unnervingly empty it was. There were no pictures on the walls, no books on the shelves, no clutter of any kind. Just a couch, a coffee table, and a TV in the living room. The kitchen counters were spotless, devoid of even a coffee maker or a toaster. I joked that he was either a minimalist or he had just moved in. He smiled but didn't answer. I sat down on the couch while he went to the kitchen to make our drinks. That's when a profound sense of unease began to creep over me. The silence in the house was deafening, as if the very walls were absorbing all sound. I pulled out my phone to text my roommate again, but I noticed something strange. My last text to her, the one with his address, had never sent. There was no signal. "Hey, do you have Wi-Fi?" I called out, trying to keep my voice light and casual. There was a pause in the kitchen before he poked his head around the corner. "Oh, yeah, sorry," he said. "The Wi-Fi's been out for a few days. Something about the storm last week messing it up." There had not been a storm last week. My stomach dropped. I wanted to leave, but I did not want him to know I was scared. Then I started noticing other things. The cocktail he made me was just a glass of water with ice. He handed it to me with a flourish, smiling as if he expected me not to notice. The windows in the living room had no curtains or blinds, just large, dark panes of glass that looked out into the inky blackness of the night. And all three of the doors leading off the living room were closed, tightly closed. I took a small sip of the water and set it down, my mind racing for an excuse to leave. "Hey, I just realized," I said, forcing a laugh. "I have to be at work super early tomorrow. I should probably get going." Adrian's smile faltered. "Already?" he asked, his tone light but strained. "You just got here." "Yeah. Sorry," I said, standing up. "I completely forgot about this morning meeting I have." He did not move. He just stood there, blocking the path to the front door. "You don't have to go," he said, his smile returning, but it did not reach his eyes. "Stay a little longer. I haven't even shown you the backyard yet." "No, really." I started, but he cut me off. "You'll love the backyard," he said, his voice firmer now, with an edge of something cold and hard. As I tried to step around him, he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Just one more drink," he said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "And then you can go." His grip tightened, and in that moment, I knew I was not getting out of there without a fight. I yanked my arm free and backed away, my voice shaking. "Adrian, let me go." "Now." For a second, he just stared at me, his face a blank, unreadable mask. Then he smiled again, a slow, chilling smile that made my blood run cold. "You're not going anywhere," he said. I did not think. I just reacted. I grabbed a glass of water from the coffee table and threw it in his face, while he was momentarily stunned. I bolted for the door, fumbled with the lock, and ran out into the night. I did not stop running until I reached the main road, where I flagged down a passing car and begged the driver to take me to the nearest gas station. From there, I called the police. When they arrived at the house, it was completely empty. No furniture, no Adrian, nothing. Just an abandoned house at the end of a dark, forgotten street. The neighbors told the police no one had lived there for years. Of course, I will continue with the next batch of your stories, rewritten in the requested style. Before I get into the story, I need to explain the atmosphere of my life at the time. Over the preceding weeks, I'd been the subject of a series of strange, unsettling events, attempted break-ins, things going missing from my apartment, the constant, unnerving feeling of being watched. It had gotten so bad that I'd installed motion-activated cameras on every possible entry point, just so I could have some peace of mind. One of the first incidents involved coming home in the middle of the day to find a man standing silently in my bedroom. He fled before I could get a good look at him, but the violation of it, the sheer audacity, left me shaken. My roommate, Leo, had mentioned feeling like he was being watched in that very room just days earlier. So, I'm on my way home from a night out, scrolling through my phone in the back of the cab, the city lights of Etheria blurring into a neon smear outside the window. I see a notification from Glimmer and open it. The girl, Ilera, is attractive, but her eagerness to meet up immediately sets off my internal alarm bells. My recent experiences had left me paranoid, and I knew, with a weary certainty, that when something sounds too good to be true, it always is. I get home, and she sends me her address. It's a 5-minute walk from my place. I'm a little drunk, and the proximity is appealing, but my gut is screaming at me that this is a bad idea. So, I send a message video call me. To my surprise, she agrees. A moment later, my phone is ringing, and it's her, looking just as she did in her pictures. She seems nice, a little high, and says she just wants to smoke and have some company. My paranoia begins to recede, replaced by a cautious excitement. I take a shower, grab a flask of whiskey, and head over. As I'm nearing her place, I see an arched walkway leading into the courtyard of an old apartment block. At the far end of the darkened corridor, I see a man's silhouette. He glances out at me, then quickly looks down at his phone, feigning distraction. I walk past, but that now familiar feeling of being watched makes me stop. I turn and walk back. As I approach the archway again, I see the man's head peek out from around the corner. We make eye contact, and he jerks back out of sight. A moment later, he emerges, seemingly engrossed in his phone, and walks away down the street. Before I have time to process this, I hear a voice behind me. Hey, it's Alara. Come on in. The whole thing feels like a setup, but she's clearly in her early 30s, not a teenager. So I try to relax. We walk up a flight of stairs, but then she veers off, leading me down another flight into the building's basement. I have a basement apartment, she explains. I follow her, my unease returning with a vengeance the moment I step into her living room. There was nothing overtly threatening about the space, but that was precisely the problem. It was too bare, too sterile. Just a sofa, a small kitchen table, and nothing else. It didn't feel like a woman's apartment, it felt like a stage. Come into my room, she says, and a wave of pure, primal fear washes over me. It's a trap, my mind screams. Don't do it. But I tell myself I'm being paranoid, and I follow her. Her room is a tiny, featureless box. A bed, an empty nightstand, and another door, which I assume leads to a bathroom. The door is closed, but there's a dark, obvious pool of water seeping out from underneath it. Before I can ask about the water, her hand is on me, her touch surprisingly aggressive. She kisses me, guiding my hand down the front of her sweatpants. Take your clothes off, she whispers. Before I can even unbutton my shirt, she's completely naked. She pulls me onto bed, and her eagerness feels performative. It's not passion, it's a distraction. Then, I hear it. A faint sound from the living room. The rustle of clothing, the soft, deliberate scuff of a shoe on the floor. Someone is out there trying to be quiet. As we're kissing, she tells me my watch is scratching her and asks me to take it off. I use the opportunity to sit up and gather my thoughts. I ask her about the water leaking from the bathroom. She either mishears me or deliberately ignores the question. Yes, I have water here, she says, grabbing a bottle from the nightstand. I take a sip, and I hear the sound again, closer this time. I can feel in my bones there is someone standing right outside the door. My heart is a frantic hammer in my chest. Inexplicably, my lips begin to burn. She can sense my unease and starts kissing the back of my neck, whispering for me to have sex with her. A part of me, the lonely, foolish part, wants this to be real. But my survival instinct is screaming. I grab my phone, pretending to check the time. I open a messaging app and send a fake audio message, my voice loud and clear. Hey guys, I'm at 314 Blackwood Lane, basement apartment. I need one of you to come and get me. Right now. If I'm not outside in 5 minutes, I'm in trouble. Call the cops. I see the look of wide-eyed shock on her face. She's speechless for a moment, then asks why I'm being so paranoid. Who's outside, I ask, and she doesn't deny it. Just a friend, she says, offering no explanation. I start to get dressed. I open the bedroom door, and the living room is darker now. The shadows deeper, more menacing. I don't see anyone, but I have the distinct feeling that I am not alone. I rush to the front door, my hands fumbling with the unfamiliar lock. I can hear someone coming up the stairs behind me. My adrenaline is surging. It's her. She opens the door, and I'm out, not looking back. When I get home, I check my security cameras. No one has triggered them. I sit in my kitchen, my mind racing. Was I just being crazy? I get a call from her. She tells me to stop being so paranoid and come back. I'm actually half considering it, thinking maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But then, a theory that had been forming in the back of my mind clicks into place. I tell her. My roommate is on the phone with the cops. I have cameras everywhere. Stay away from my apartment. There's a pause, and then she says, her voice a low, chilling whisper, I know your roommate isn't home from work yet. And then she hangs up. It all made sense. The people who had been breaking into my building had been using the apartment of my elderly, senile neighbor, whose unit was next to mine on the top floor. They were coming in through his unlocked window, using his place as a base of operations, and that night they had decided to rob me. knowing my roommate's schedule. When I came home early, they had tried to distract me, to lure me into a trap. When I was 18, my two best friends and I decided to go out for a night in the city of Althena. One of my friends, Chloe, had been chatting with a 19-year-old guy named Joris on Glimmer, and he had invited us to meet him at a trendy bar downtown. The idea of free drinks with a handsome stranger seemed like a great adventure. We got ready, took the train, and arrived in the city, the night air buzzing with a kinetic energy. We did a little shopping, grabbed a bite to eat, and then made our way to the bar. It was a stylish, dimly lit place with high ceilings and a long, polished bar. We found a few empty stools and waited. We didn't see anyone who matched Joris' profile pictures, so we ordered some sodas and waited some more. After a while, Chloe got a message from him saying he was delayed. We waited. She tried to message him again, but her texts went unanswered. It was then that a man who had been sitting at the bar the whole time, a few seats down from us, turned and asked if he could buy us a drink. He was older, maybe in his mid-30s, but there were three of us, and we had come for free drinks. So we said yes. He ordered us a round of shots, and then another. He eventually moved down the bar and joined our conversation, and after a while, we all moved to a more comfortable lounge area in the corner. We were all a little tipsy, laughing and having a good time. But then, the man's questions started to take on a sleazy, sexually suggestive tone. He was not attractive at all, and his advances were making us all deeply uncomfortable. I was starting to feel a little too drunk and decided to get some water. As I stood at the bar, the waitress leaned in close and told me, her voice a low, urgent whisper, that we should absolutely not go home with the man we were with. She explained that it was a known pattern at their bar a young woman would be sitting alone, having been stood up, and this same man, who was always conveniently there, would swoop in, buy her drinks, get her drunk, and then try to take her home with him. And the man she was describing was the man we were sitting with. I did not make the connection immediately, but I understood that this man was not the kind, generous stranger he appeared to be. I went back to our table and told my friends I wanted to go home. They agreed immediately. We tried to say our goodbyes, but the man was relentless, pressuring us to have another drink, to go to another bar. He said he had a bottle of expensive rum at his place and asked if we wanted to come and get it. He followed us out of the bar, still trying to convince us, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to follow us all the way to the train station. But he eventually gave up and disappeared into another bar, and we made our escape. The next day, the full, chilling reality of what had happened finally sank in. I told my friends what the waitress had said, and when Chloe tried to find Joris' Glimmer profile again, she discovered he had blocked her. I am 100% certain that the 30-something man who had so conveniently been there to rescue us when we got stood up was, in fact, the 19-year-old Joris we were supposed to meet. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if we had gone home with him, if I had been there alone. It's a chilling reminder that predators can wear many faces, and that sometimes the kindest-seeming stranger is the most dangerous one of all. The restaurant buzzed with the warm, comforting chatter of other diners, a pleasant, anonymous sound that usually would have put me at ease. But tonight, I sat stiffly at the table, my nerves a tangled, chaotic knot in my stomach. It had been a long time since I'd been on a date, a full 3 years since the fiery, emotionally devastating end of a long-term relationship. But here I was, pushing myself back out into the terrifying, unpredictable world of dating. For 2 weeks, I'd been talking to a guy named Ethan. On paper, he seemed perfect, funny, charming, with no glaring red flags. Our conversations had been light and easy, and he had managed to coax a fragile, tentative hope out of the wreckage of my past. He arrived a little late, a whirlwind of smiles and easy confidence as he slid into the booth across from me. The dim, intimate lighting of the restaurant cast soft shadows across his face, making him seem almost too handsome to be real. "Sorry I'm late," he said with a wink. Traffic was a nightmare. We started with the usual awkward small talk, the kind that feels like wading through thick mud. Then, somewhere in the middle of me explaining why I had not been out much lately. I mentioned that I'd been saving up for a new washer and dryer. He leaned back in his chair, a smug, knowing smirk on his face. "You know," he said, his voice casual but laced with sharp, cruel edge. "Instead of saving for that, you should save for a boob job." For a moment, I was sure I had misheard him. The words hung in the air between us, a grotesque, unfunny joke waiting for a punchline that never came. He was dead serious. I stare at him, my mind a complete blank, a hot flush of shame and anger creeping up my neck. Before I could even begin to formulate a response, he doubled down. No. "It's not a bad thing," he said, waving his hand dismissively as if he were doing me a favor. "My sister and my mom both had small chests, and they got boob jobs. They look amazing now." My mind was reeling. Did he really just say that to me on a first date, before we had even ordered our drinks? My throat tightened, a lump of pure, unadulterated indignation forming as I tried to comprehend the sheer, breathtaking audacity of this man. He just sat there, looking at me as if he had just imparted some profound, life-altering wisdom, as if he expected me to thank him for his thoughtful, unsolicited critique of my body. My heart was pounding, a frantic, panic rhythm in my ears. I didn't say a word. I didn't argue. I didn't demand an explanation. I just stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out. The leg of my chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing a few curious glances, but I didn't care. The cold night air was a welcome shock to my system as I walked, my heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the pavement. Each step felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself, the part that had been worn down by heartbreak and self-doubt. By the time I reached my car, the initial shock had given way to a simmering, righteous anger. How dare he? How dare anyone think they had the right to comment on my body, as if it were a piece of property up for renovation? I sat in my car for a long moment, and then a laugh escaped my lips, sharp, bitter, but a laugh nonetheless. This was not to start a new love story, but maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something better, a reminder that I did not have to settle, that I did not have to endure anyone's thoughtless cruelty just to feel wanted. Of course. Here is the next batch of stories from the provided file, rewritten according to your detailed instructions. The theater was buzzing with that unique, electric energy that only a major movie premiere can generate. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and anticipation. I'd been looking forward to this night for weeks, not just for the movie, but for the date. I was meeting a woman named Alana, and she seemed genuinely interesting, a rare find in the often shallow waters of online dating. The film was the new Star Wars, a perfect excuse for shared popcorn and whispered jokes in the dark. At least, that's how I had pictured it. What I had not pictured was the surprise waiting for me when I arrived. Alana was standing by the ticket counter, just as we'd arranged, but she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, a nervous, awkward grin plastered on her face, was another woman. "This is my sister, Beth," Alana said, her tone so casual it was jarring, as if bringing a chaperone on a first date was the most natural thing in the world. I blinked, my mind struggling to catch up. My gut was screaming that something was deeply wrong, but I pushed the feeling down. Maybe they're just really close. I told myself, play it cool. What's the worst that could happen? The worst began at the ticket counter. Somehow, in the blur of introductions and awkward pleasantries, I ended up paying for all three of us. I can't even recall how it happened, it just did. One moment I was pulling out my wallet to buy my own ticket. The next I was standing there with a sinking feeling in my stomach, clutching 3 tickets to a movie I was suddenly no longer excited to see. As we settled into our seats, the situation only deteriorated. The lights dimmed, the iconic opening crawl began to scroll up the screen, and I glanced over at them, hoping to share in the moment. But they both looked utterly and completely lost. "So, who's that guy in the black helmet?" Beth whispered loudly, pointing at the screen. "Wait, what's the deal with the little rolling droid?" Alana chimed in a moment later. It hit me then with the force of a physical blow. They had never seen a Star Wars movie before. Not a single one. I stared straight ahead, a wave of pure, unadulterated frustration washing over me as they whispered back and forth, their constant, clueless questions shattering any hope I had of losing myself in the film. Every plot twist, every emotional beat, every nostalgic callback to the original trilogy, none of it landed for them. I just sat there, trapped in the darkness between two strangers, acutely aware of how thoroughly my evening had been derailed. When the credits finally rolled, I let out a sigh of relief, ready to make a quick escape. But the night, to my horror, was not yet over. They wanted to go to a fast food joint. We ended up in the harsh, fluorescent glare of a nearby burger place, the air thick with the smell of grease and regret. I ordered a small drink and watched as Alana ordered small fries. Just fries. Her sister, of course, ordered a full meal for over an hour. I sat in that plastic booth, a prisoner in a brightly lit purgatory, nursing my drink and watching Alana meticulously eat one single French fry at a time. Meanwhile, Beth held court, launching into an unfiltered, vitriolic tirade about every single person at her job. No one was safe from her sharp, biting commentary. I glanced at Alana more than once, a desperate, silent plea for a lifeline, for some sign of connection that might salvage the night. But she seemed perfectly content to let her sister dominate the conversation, occasionally nodding along or offering a non-committal grunt of agreement. By the time I finally made it back to my car, my head was spinning. What had just happened? Was that a date? A bizarre family outing? An elaborate, cruel prank? The whole experience felt surreal, as if I'd accidentally stumbled into someone else's strange, dysfunctional life and been forced to play a part. There was no second date. She never reached out, and neither did I. To this day, I still think about that night. And the only conclusion I can draw is this: if someone brings an unexpected guest on a first date, it's a red flag the size of a Death Star, and next time, I'm only paying for one ticket. I was scrolling through Glimmer late one night, the blue light of my phone's screen, the only illumination in my dark dorm room at Northgate University. A notification popped up. A match had messaged me. Her name was Serena, and her profile had caught my eye earlier. She had a sharp, sarcastic wit in her bio and a mischievous, intelligent glint in her eyes. I'd been hopeful. "Hey, what's up?" I typed, keeping it simple. Her response came almost immediately, and it was unexpected. "Don't talk to me unless you meet certain standards," she wrote. I froze, rereading the message. The tone wasn't playful or flirtatious. It was just bizarre. I replied with something equally nonsensical, and she never responded. I chalked it up to the inherent strangeness of online dating and promptly forgot about it. A week passed. It was late. I'd been cramming for a midterm, and a familiar, gnawing hunger began to set in. I decided to make a quick run to a 24-hour fast food place, a greasy beacon of hope in the dead of night. The restaurant was buzzing with its usual late-night clientele: students, third-shift workers, and the generally inebriated. I shuffled into line, placed my order, and waited, my mind already drifting back to the dense, boring textbook waiting for me at home. The employee behind the counter called my number, and I stepped forward, reaching for my bag of food. But the moment she handed it to me, the air between us seemed to crackle and shift. Our eyes met, and in that split second, I recognized her. It was the girl from Glimmer. Serena. Recognition, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic, flashed across her face. She looked at me as if I were a ghost, a monster from a nightmare she had thought she had escaped. Her hand, the one holding out my bag of food, was visibly trembling. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. And then the horrifying realization hit me. She thought I had come here on purpose. She thought I had tracked her down to confront her about that one ridiculous, forgotten message. The awkwardness in the air was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating wall of tension that seemed to grow with every passing second. I wanted to say something, to clear up the insane misunderstanding. but my brain refused to cooperate. What could I possibly say? Hey, I didn't know you worked here. This is just a crazy coincidence. It sounded like the world's worst, most obvious lie. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to me, as if she were calculating the fastest possible escape route. My face was burning with a hot, prickly embarrassment. This was not just awkward, it was surreal. Finally, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the bag, mumbled a quick thanks, and walked out of there as fast as I could without breaking into a fool-in sprint. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I didn't look back. I did not dare. The cool night air hit me like a splash of cold water, but the tension in my chest did not begin to ease until I was safely back in my car. I could not shake the image of her face, her eyes wide with genuine, palpable fear. She probably thought I was some kind of stalker, and the thought made me cringe. In reality, I had barely remembered her existence until that very moment. The next day, I deleted Glimmer. ID had enough of the strange, unpredictable world of online dating. In my late 20s, I was navigating the often treacherous waters of dating apps. This time, I was trying a site called Serendipity on the strong recommendation of my best friend. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to hang out with. One night, a message popped up from a guy named Noah. His profile was sparse, just a vague, text-only description about his love for books and hiking. Normally, I would have swiped left, but his message was different. It was a long, thoughtful paragraph about one of my favorite books, which ID mentioned in my profile. He asked a specific, insightful question about it, and it was clear he wasn't just sending out a generic, copy-pasted line. We started talking, and he was smart with a dry, sarcastic wit that I found incredibly appealing. Our conversations flowed effortlessly. The only strange thing was his refusal to send a picture of himself. He claimed he was camera shy, and I, against my better judgment, convinced myself it was not a big deal. He seemed so genuine. After a week of messaging, he asked if I wanted to meet in person at a quiet little coffee shop in the sleepy, suburban town of Havenwood. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I told my roommate where I was going just to be safe. The day of the date, I arrived at the coffee shop early. It was a small, unassuming place tucked into the corner of a strip mall. But when I walked in, it was completely empty. No baristas, no customers, just a faint, sad smell of old coffee grounds. I checked the address Noah had sent me. I was in the right place. I took a seat by the window and waited. About 5 minutes later, a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, his face obscured by shadow. He brushed past my table and sat in the far corner, facing the wall. I kept waiting. 10 more minutes passed. Then, I got a text from Noah. "Are you here?" It read. "Yeah," I replied. And by the window, no response. I looked around the empty room again, and that's when I noticed it. The man in the hoodie was turned slightly, just enough that I could see he was holding a phone, his thumb moving across the screen. Almost immediately, I got another text from Noah. "You look exactly like I imagined." A cold, sharp fear pierced through me. I glanced down at my phone, then back at the man in the hoodie. His head was still tilted down, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching from the shadows of his hood. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was a coincidence. I texted back, "Where are you sitting?" No response. I stood up, pretending to adjust my bag, and walked towards the door. The man in the hoodie didn't move, but I could feel his gaze on me the entire time. As soon as I was outside, I called my roommate, my voice a frantic, breathless whisper. "Get in your car and leave," she said. "Now." I walked quickly to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. That's when I got another text. "Why are you leaving? We haven't even talked yet." I looked up, and there he was, standing in the doorway of the coffee shop, a dark, menacing silhouette against the dim light. His hood was still up, his face still a mystery, but I could feel the intensity of his stare, a physical pressure against my skin. I peeled out of the parking lot and didn't stop driving until I was home. I blocked his number and deleted the app, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, lingered for days. A couple of weeks later, I saw a news headline that made my blood run cold. A man had been arrested for stalking and attempted kidnapping, using fake profiles on dating apps to lure women to isolated locations. The mugshot attached to the article was him. The man from the coffee shop. The man with the hoodie. The police had found duct tape, rope, and a knife in the trunk of his car. Of course. Here is the next batch of your stories, rewritten in the requested style. The dim, flickering glow of my phone screen was the only light in my dorm room at Blackwood University. I was scrolling through Glimmer, bored and half-heartedly swiping, a typical Tuesday night for a college freshman. Then I saw her. Her name was Aurora, and she was a few years older, a junior, with a smile that radiated a fierce, almost predatory confidence. Her profile was a mix of artsy photos and witty, sarcastic captions. I was immediately intimidated and intrigued. A match came almost instantly, followed by her first message. A few days later, I was at her off-campus apartment, the air thick with the smell of incense, and something else I could not quite place. The vibe was relaxed, just Netflix and casual, easy conversation. I thought she was amazing, funny, down-to-earth, and so far in my league, it was almost comical. As I was leaving that night, I told her I'd like to see her again, and her response was enthusiastic. The week that followed was a dizzying flurry of texts and Snapchats. It felt exciting, new, the kind of instant connection you read about but never really believe is real. Then out of the blue, she sent me a nude. I was startled, not because I didn't find her attractive, she was stunning, but because it was so unexpected. Our first hangout had been completely platonic, but I was 19 and a confident, beautiful older woman was showing me an incredible amount of attention. I won't lie, I was flattered. The messages escalated over the next few days, and by the time we made plans to meet again, I had no doubt where the night was headed. That Saturday, she came over to my place. My roommates and I were lounging in our messy living room, and she fit in seamlessly, laughing and joking as if she had known them for years. At one point, she leaned over and whispered, "Can I stay the night?" My brain went into overdrive. After the pictures she had been sending me all week, I knew what that meant. I tried to be polite, offering to sleep on the couch, but she just laughed. "I'd rather you sleep in your bed with me," she said, her voice a low, suggestive purr. We retreated to my room, and one thing led to another. Afterward, we were lying side by side in a hazy, comfortable silence, and I, in a moment of post-coital carelessness, tossed a used condom onto the floor beside the bed. Then she got up abruptly. I watched, confused, as she walked around to my side of the bed, bent down, and picked up the condom. My heart sank, a cold, sharp dread piercing through the warm afterglow. Without a word, she disappeared into the attached bathroom and shut the door. I lay there, my mind racing. A moment later, I heard a loud crash, followed by a panicked, "Oh no," alarmed. I called out, "Are you okay?" Silence. I hesitated, then walked to the bathroom door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I opened it. She was standing in my shower, one leg propped up on the tiled wall, trying to shove a used condom into herself. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what she was doing. She was flipping it inside out, attempting to inseminate herself. I froze, my brain struggling to process the grotesque, surreal scene unfolding in front of me. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with mixture of shock and something else animalistic. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, and then everything sped up. I slammed the door shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. A moment later, she emerged from the bathroom, her face a blank mask, avoiding my gaze. "I'm going to leave," she said, her voice flat and emotionless as she gathered her things. "Sounds good," I replied, my own voice a hollow echo in the suddenly silent room. There was nothing else to say. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left standing there, in the middle of my small, messy dorm room, in stunned, horrified silence. I never saw her or heard from her again. I had just joined a dating website called Soulmate, back when online dating was still a strange, new frontier, a digital Wild West populated mostly by the brave and the desperate. I did not have high hopes, but then her profile popped up and everything changed. Her name was Isabella, and she was stunning. The kind of beautiful that makes you immediately suspicious, that makes you double-check for signs of a catfish. But she was real. She responded to my message, and soon we were planning a date. When I met her in person at a chic, dimly lit wine bar in the affluent neighborhood of Silverwood, I felt like I was walking on air. She was even more gorgeous than her photos, a vision of confidence and charm. To my utter astonishment, the date was going well, better than well. We were laughing, talking with an easy, familiar rhythm, as if we'd known each other for years. By the time we'd finished our first drink, we'd already stolen a kiss in a dark, secluded corner of the restaurant. I could not believe my luck. This kind of thing just did not happen to me. So, when she suggested we keep the night going at a bar nearby, I did not hesitate. The bar was a cozy, intimate space with a warm, inviting hum of conversation filling the air. We found a quiet corner and settled in with our drinks. She leaned in close, her hand brushing mine, her laugh a bright, musical sound in the dim light. I could not stop marveling at the surreal, wonderful turn my night had taken. And then the door opened. A group of young black men walked in, laughing and talking amongst themselves. It was unusual for our small, predominantly white town, but it was certainly no big deal. Or at least it should not have been. That's when Isabella stood up. At first, I thought she was going to the restroom, but instead, she turned toward the group and, in a voice that was suddenly loud and sharp and ugly, she began to shout. "You don't belong here," she yelled, her voice cutting to the bar's pleasant chatter like a shard of broken glass. "Go back to where you came from." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air seemed to rush out of the room, leaving a thick, suffocating silence in its wake. But she was not done. She kept going. Her beautiful face twisted into a grotesque mass of hatred as she hurled a torrent of racial slurs, including the worst one, over and over again. The group of men froze, their laughter replaced by stunned, incredulous silence. The entire bar had turned to watch, a ripple of disbelief and unease spreading to the crowd. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, a sudden, violent tear in the fabric of reality. My mind was racing, every cell in my body screaming, "What is happening right now?" I stared at her, this gorgeous, charming woman who I had, just moments before, thought was perfect, and I felt a sickening, visceral revulsion. My skin crawled. The shock quickly curdled into a hot, bitter shame. I could not sit there a second longer. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked straight out the door without a word, without a backward glance. The cold night air was a welcome slap in the face, but it did little to cool the fire of disgust and anger raging inside me. The next day, she sent me a message asking for a second date, as if nothing had happened. I didn't reply. There was no explanation she could offer, no excuse I could ever accept. Some things you just can't unsee. And her true, ugly self was one of them. The gamer bar was a chaotic, beautiful symphony of neon lights and electronic sounds, a nostalgic haven for nerds like me. It was a perfect setting for a first date with a guy named Leo, who, from our online conversations, seemed to be my geeky soulmate. We had bonded over obscure video games and a shared, sarcastic sense of humor. When he walked in, he looked just like his profile picture reads, a little scruffy. Glasses perched on his nose, a t-shirt with a deep-cut gaming reference that I immediately recognized. I waved, he smiled, and as he approached my table, a comfortable, uneasy feeling settled over me. This might actually be different, I thought, the moment he opened his mouth to greet me. However, that comfortable feeling shattered. He had no teeth. None. I struggled to mask my shock, my brain scrambling to reconcile the man in front of me with the one I had been talking to for weeks. This was not a small, insignificant detail. It was a glaring omission, one that had been carefully, deliberately hidden in his photos and during our video chats. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. There had to be a reason. I forced a smile and pushed the thought aside as we sat down. The conversation, at first, was just as easy and fun as it had been online. He was funny and smart, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company. But soon, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So, he began. I don't know if you noticed I blinked, trying to avoid looking directly at his gums. Notice what? I asked, feigning ignorance. He gestured vaguely toward his mouth. The teeth thing. It was impossible to ignore now. He launched into a bizarre, horrifying story about a hack dentist who would convince him that all of his teeth were rotten and needed to be removed. Then came the grim details about budget constraints and the fact that he had to wait for shards of bone to fall out of his gums before he could even be fitted for dentures. I listened, nodding sympathetically. It was a tragic, awful story, and I genuinely felt for him. But as he spoke, it became clear that he was completely unfazed by the situation, joking about it as if it were some amusing anecdote. Then the food arrived. As he talked, particles of his half-chewed meal would spray from his mouth, landing on the shared basket of fries between us. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but with each fleck of food that landed on our shared plate, my appetite withered and died. It wasn't his fault, of course, but the visual was just too much. I found myself retreating inward, my thoughts spiraling. If he had hidden something this monumental from me, what else was he hiding? He, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to my growing discomfort, talking enthusiastically about his favorite video games and the tabletop RPG campaigns he was running. Normally, I would have been thrilled to dive into those topics, but my focus kept snapping back to the reality of the situation. As the evening wore on, I realized something else. I could not get past the thought of being intimate with someone who had no teeth. I felt shallow for even thinking it, but the idea of kissing him made my stomach churn. When the check came, I politely suggested we call a night. He smiled, seemingly unaware of my internal turmoil, and thanked me for a fun time. I smiled back, hoping it did not look as forced as it felt. The next day, he texted to ask about a second date. I let him down gently. He was a good guy, but this was a breach of trust, a lie of omission that I just could not move past.